But it's the only conference room I could find for today.
We should make it
There you go.
Yeah. Do you want to kick off?
Yep, so let's call this meeting to order. And Lynn, who is online. Morning, Lynn.
Hi, all.
And Pat is sick.
Oh, it's so bad.
Yeah, me.
Not COVID disappears.
I don't know. She was really feeling poorly yesterday. Called this morning and just said she's down and out today in bed. So
It's too bad.
yeah. She won't be here. So our first order of business is to review our agenda. Are there any additions or corrections?
So I need to make a couple corrections on the record because the one I posted online had some errors in it.
Okay.
The first one is the meeting minutes are from 8:27, not 7:30.
Mhm.
And also I added Megan Metcalf's early discharge request to this.
So a motion to approve the agenda.
I make a motion to include the agenda with the addition and the deletion.
Second. Motion made second to approve the amended agenda. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 6 in favor, 1 absent. Review and approve our minutes from August 27th.
To approve the minutes of August 27th.
I'll second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve our minutes from August 27th. Are there any corrections or changes? All in favor of approving and written signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Thank you, Lynn. We are 6 in favor and 1 absent. Good job, Philby. So we have 2 early discharge requests. And hopefully everybody had a chance to look at them. A couple of you may recall that we did consider Mr. Chan about a year ago. Dave's Chan.
Okay, we're gonna start with him.
Yeah, let me start again.
Okay.
So before we started the meeting, MJ and I were just chatting briefly about his case, and we did get a request last year. And at that time, the board asked to see if there was any additional information that would be available from treatment provider or from Massachusetts. And Maria Godlewski did what she could to find any additional information and submitted a counseling services report from September 10th, 2024. And essentially there's nothing additional other than there have been no issues and they're still requesting that us consider early discharge. Any thoughts or questions or?
In Massachusetts didn't give an opinion on early discharge or not. It just states that from the counselor, it's not believed that Mr. Chan poses a risk to safety of others or to the general public. And he's been compliant with all of his treatment and conditions.
I'm not seeing it. For how long has he been compliant?
Since 2013.
Oh.
11 years.
Yeah, August of 2013. He's been seeing the same counseling
Incarcerated
service.
for 10 years prior to that.
Is there a consensus on this?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's any objection, I would entertain a motion one way or the other to
I have a motion.
schedule.
Sure.
So Tom has moved that we schedule an early discharge hearing for Mr. Chan, sorry.
I'll second.
Second by Steve. Any other discussion on the motion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Aye. Opposed? Nay. We have 5 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 absent. So it is a majority decision to schedule a hearing. Samantha Terrio.
No, that's the PO. So it's Megan Metcalf.
Sorry.
And then we'll go back to Edward Tatro. I think you skipped him. He was first in the packet. That's okay.
Megan Metcalf. We're gonna have a chance to work it for the report on that. Any discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Wow.
Yeah, she's, the only thing I have in her folder is her parole hearing from April of 2021. So she hasn't been before the board for anything else.
She's about to graduate with her associate's degree too.
Everything else we should run after review.
So,
Yeah.
okay. Motion has been made and seconded to schedule an early discharge hearing for Megan Metcalf. Any other discussion?
She paid her restitution.
Yeah,
You don't have
exactly.
to see that.
That's, she had to pay restitution, I would have looked at it. Yeah, she gets it.
Okay, all those in favor then signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. We are 6 in favor and 1 absent. Edward Tatro.
The only thing in his folder is his parole hearing from 2015. He's not been before the board for anything else.
So let's say pro-social everything.
There's no, they've exhausted resources trying to look up the victim of record.
So he has been 8 years and 9 months without incident. Under community supervision.
But I'm for review.
Mhm.
So a motion has been made and seconded to schedule Edward Tatro for an early discharge hearing. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none then, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, Lynn. We are 6 in favor and 1 absent. Okay. Looking at our October schedule. If we'll start, just give me any dates you have that are.
I was never sure, like, with the amount of weeks in this month, if we were gonna start first week, if we were missing a week, or don't do the last week of the month. I wasn't quite sure. How that-
So what we do is we start, so that's why I think I included all of you when I sent out the 2025 schedules. So what we do is we start the first week, depending on where the first hits, where this month, the first hits on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's why I got.
If the first hits on Monday or Tuesday, we'll start on the first,
Mhm.
and then we'll run 3 weeks. And then we'll have our staff meeting and our overflow day, and then sometimes we'll have a week off.
Okay, well, that's what I was wondering.
Which us in the office
Yeah.
love those.
I should have looked at that
Yeah.
schedule, because I wasn't sure if when that happens, if it's always the last week or the first week
Yeah.
that is off.
The only month that kind of varies is July because of the fourth,
Oh, yeah.
we start the second week.
So if the first is a Wednesday and Thursday, you start.
Yeah, I try to, and Christmas sometimes, holidays can sometimes throw monkey wrenches into things, but
Yeah.
Why don't we start with Lynn for October?
Yeah, sure.
Pleasure.
Thank you. I've got 4 dates that I can't do. And
Okay.
it's the 3rd, 8, 10, 22.
3, 8, 10, 22.
Correct. Thank you.
Maybe?
It's easier for me to tell you the dates I can.
Yeah, that's okay.
And this month is a little funky because I'll be in Bermuda for a week.
Oh,
So on a cruise.
can I come?
Sure. It is a girls' cruise, so come on.
Okay.
But I did build in some extra days around that, so I can do the 1st, the 8th, the 10th, the 22nd, the 23rd. And I was gonna say the 29th, but it looks like that week is off, so.
Good, thank you. Sam?
So I cannot do the 2nd or the 15th, but I'm free other than that.
Tom?
I'm busy every Monday and Friday, Saturday and Sunday, but I have those weekdays. Monday and Thursday, it's good, I'm available, but I'm gonna be busier than heck the rest of the month. But I am available for those 3 days every.
Fortunately, I don't have anything that doesn't. I guess I'm gonna have to work around.
I know that day that I can do on the tenth is a Bennington day, but
Season.
from what I've seen so far, there's nothing that
Okay.
conflicts. So if you need to put me on the tenth, that's
Okay.
fine.
Fall harvest in New York.
Great. So,
So one thing real quick before we move off of October, because I forgot to put this in the additions. And it's not quite 10 o'clock, and this is the last thing before Richard. At our last staff meeting or 2 staff meetings ago, we talked about starting in October, doing SDMFs for all cases. So I wanted to just bring that up
yeah,
to see where we're at.
how's it, everybody all set? Right, I'm doing more at home now anyway, so it's easier. I don't have a problem,
The Peter Richmond,
right?
he's shaking his head.
He already held his head, I knew his.
Yeah, you're
answer.
okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, we got to take the training wheels off at some point, right? So-
Yeah, you're right. Let her go.
And I think some days there's gonna be more than others. but
Yeah.
October
It'll
16th,
balance out.
October 16th will be the worst, so if anybody.
I'm about, I can't do it.
That's the day I'm not doing either, so I'm good.
Hearing's canceled on the 16th.
Yeah, it's a modern system.
Well, I will tell you,
Wednesday, they usually restock on Wednesday.
so on October 1st, next Tuesday, we had 14 violation hearings scheduled and 2 other hearings scheduled.
14 violations.
So we did not release that schedule until yesterday because I got with the attorneys ahead of time and said, we need you to, the board can't do 14. I know you can't do 14. What are we doing? So we brought it down to a hearing day from 9 to noon. So
Can we throw some on the overflow?
we did throw 2.
Oh, okay.
We threw 2 on the overflow day because they were conflict counsel. We're seeing conflict counsel happening a lot more. Where PRO can't represent somebody. And that is a thorn in our sides because then we have to wait for PC to happen.
Yeah.
And then it throws timelines off. It's getting more complicated as the days go on.
Yeah, if they weren't all violations, we could go for a turbo that day.
Right.
What's a turbo?
We have 6, we have 2 boards working.
Oh, okay.
So what basically my pitch was that to them, if you can't give me postponements or propose resolutions, I'm moving some to the 2nd because the 2nd was very slim again this month.
Yeah, we were doing well with the proposed resolution. All of a sudden, I haven't seen anything recently.
Because I don't think there's been a lot of cases to propose resolutions.
They're coming.
I guess it's a little bit nice to see. Oh, that's a great now. Everybody's happy. Okay, fine.
Yeah, I think the cases are just really complicated, so I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm trying to head off some of these big schedules before they go, because it's getting to be a lot. And if you notice this month, we had to invoke the overflow day, plus we had 2 St. J days and one ended up getting just about to nothing. We had 2 Newport days, so we invoked a lot of different stuff this month.
We had a trial on the overflow day.
I missed that. I was in St. J.
How'd that go?
It went well. I was at the LUS meeting. We were talking about OMS. There's a bunch of issues with the new parole summary and other reports. So I'm going to start working with some folks to get some of that changed.
Good.
DOC staff's having some trouble with it. We're having some trouble with it. So It's actually Carla and Colby's task when they leave us, when Richard gets here, is to make me a list.
You will be getting a list.
Great.
We haven't already started.
So,
Good.
yeah, but it was good. I also got to hear some other stuff. There's some other training. Victim Services is going to be coming to talk to the board in October. There are some other some victims trainings that are coming out from the sounds of it that they were talking about, and I think it'll be good. So hopefully we'll have some more. I think it's around victim dialogue, how to, especially around DOC staff, talking to victims, and a victim that's known throughout the country is doing some training with different folks. So I think that'll be good.
Great.
Yeah.
Is there any new hires for prisoners' rights, or are they still?
No, Don Matthews. So in October and November, Jill is going to be going back out on leave. And Don Matthews is going to come in and take some of her cases. And I know the name. I don't think I've ever met her. I don't know. Did she used to?
Yeah, she did them years ago.
Yeah. So I'll have 2 Dons. And Annie.
You, one when Don Matthews was doing yours, or Don Matthews, do you remember her? She's been gone for a while.
Yeah.
I remember Don Matthews.
Yes.
So- She's at least filmed in a couple times.
Yeah, I
It was
think
not
you're right,
the time when I was here.
I dealt with her in email. I don't think I've ever met her.
Well, she was a yeah.
Yeah,
Long
So
time no see.
then I'm assuming the 22nd is gonna be in person, right?
Good question.
Good question. Do we want to have an in-person in October?
Because
I'll make the agenda.
well, do we want to I think I could make it big. We could do some more manual stuff because November, we'll definitely do teams in November, or we'll cancel in November because it's going to be right around Thanksgiving. That's real quick.
Everybody's okay
Roll
with that,
board.
when we schedule October, it'll be our last in-person for the year, the rest of
I am good.
Okay.
Are you over at our building?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I will either be over or I'll send somebody over. Carla will be over to grab you in just a second. Yeah, just stay right there and Carla will be over. Thank you. So, I'm glad I answered it. It was an Essex Junction number. It must be the phone outside our office.
Oh,
Because Richard's over there. He's like, I saw a building, but I couldn't figure out how to get in.
The old days, you take the tunnel, get it, but
Yeah.
here.
oh, yeah.
All right, so the October here, or staff meeting will be in person.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because I think that'll be because then you'll be headed south.
Yeah.
And then we'll probably be retreating to teams for most of the winter.
And I forgot to mention today, I'm glad that we're just doing like last steps at 3. I have to leave at 3. I have to be back in Bennington by 5:30.
Okay.
Good.
Depending on how long we talk, we might be done earlier. I don't know.
Okay.
But if not, just go.
Yeah. I have somewhere I have to be by 6.
And Lynn, you're scooting out in a little while, is that correct?
He's muted.
Sorry, I couldn't find it unmute. I'm gonna have you guys on my headphones. And I have to
Okay.
drive in. I'm leaving in about 10 minutes to drive into Subaru, and then I'll probably be sort of out while I deliver the car and then wait for them to tell me what it is, because I'm hoping it's under warranty, because I think it's going to be an expensive repair.
Yep.
And then as soon as I pick up the loaner that they promised me, I will be zooming toward you and I'll have you back in my earphones again. So I'll
Okay.
probably just be kind of out there for maybe 40 minutes or something.
Okay. And we are in the building next door. So if you go in the main entrance over by, it's between Weeks and DPS.
Yeah, I looked at the map, MJ, so I think I'll be okay. I'll send you a message when I get there.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
So Richard will be here momentarily. Yeah, I'm hoping to get more stuff to review for October staff meeting. We'll see. Things have been absolutely nuts.
Just a heads up, the end of October, tech support has to go to energy. I'm not here the last week.
I don't know, I had you text for problem.
I know. I haven't had phone calls from you in a while.
Oh, I'm pretty self-sufficient, why?
Don't look at me.
No, I did too.
Yeah, Colby's out the first week, the last week of October, and then Carl is out the first week of November.
I assume everybody saw the memo on the password thing.
I sent it again yesterday, so it's in your state. It's in your state email.
Yeah, I had to change mine earlier this week and I kept trying to change it. Finally, I got locked out. I went back and looked through some emails and found that passwords now changed to 14 characters.
16. But here's an hint for
I'll look
you.
at my email, I guess.
My first one
14.
that I stumbled around trying to think of. You look at the sticker on your computer, your agency number, it's perfect. 16 letters. It's a hat and make it cats and numbers.
Oh, perfect. So we know how to get into Wayne's computer.
There you go. Get out. But it's perfect.
Well, the only thing I caution you on is write down whatever 14 characters you use.
Yeah, and that's why it's perfect, because the sticker's not even there.
I have to change it again.
Next time around, I just changed one number.
Thank you, Carla.
Richard, morning, Dean, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Sorry, my hands are.
Oh, that's great.
Hi.
Everybody.
Hi.
Glad you made it.
I'll get out of your way.
Wow, we are all, we're just chit chatting at this point.
Our business is done.
Our business has been quick.
Well, then I'll join you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you have a good trip out?
Yeah, it was fine. I had to do some work in DC yesterday, so
Oh, did you?
I came up last night
Okay.
from DC. Always fun to be here.
Are you gonna be affected by the storm at all? Back home?
They're not sure. They said my flight home might be delayed.
Yeah.
So,
When are you flying now?
well,
It just meant.
tonight,
Tonight. Yes, good.
so see how that all.
To
I'm gonna do some research.
Atlanta?
So I'll go back to DC and then I'll.
And it's staying.
Yeah. Avoid Atlanta if you can.
It seems
Hey,
to
printed
be
that out for you.
deliberative.
Yeah.
We got our hurricane. Let me see that time I know.
Yeah.
It can't just be yours.
No, I just say,
Yeah.
I'm just moving myself.
Yeah.
Nice. Never. Yeah. Let me do some research. I'll let you know this next time, because I couldn't do a problem. Bye, everybody. Have a good training.
Thank you, Colby.
I'll message you, Carla.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Carla's gonna do lunch delivery at lunch.
So Richard Lynn behind you is on screen
Oh,
and.
well, then I'm sitting in the wrong.
No, that's okay.
It's fine.
No,
And
you're
Pat.
fine, Richard. You're fine. Good to see you. Nice to see you. I know you can't see me, but I have to drive my car soon, so thank you.
Well, I like to at least look at the screen. So I can imagine that you're there.
And our vice chair is sick today, so.
Well, sorry to hear that. It's good weather to stay in bed though, probably. Well, thank y'all for inviting me to come back and chat with you some more. I was here about 4 or 5 months ago.
May, yeah.
And we began to explore 3 topics and talked about some things. You okay, Wayne? You ready?
I'm ready.
You ready for this? All right. We began to talk about conditions and condition setting and modifications of conditions, and maybe some language around conditions that you might want to take a look at. And we talked about violations, and we talked about your decision-making process. We talked a little bit about how you go about making the decisions you make and what perhaps might be some changes or improvements you might want to make in the approach or decision-making process on violations. And we talked a little bit about some of your performance measures and some of the ways that you analyze or measure your own performance and what you might want to have in those performance measures and how you might want to modify them. So that's what we talked about. And amazingly enough, although I just said that in 2 minutes, we spent pretty much a whole day talking about those things last time I was here. And we'll spend as much time today talking about those things as you would like to see what we can do to kind of wrap up this technical assistance and to hopefully provide you with enough of a start on whatever changes or improvements or modifications you might want to make in your system or your policies or your data or whatever. So it's a pretty flexible schedule. Be glad to turn my phone off for starters. I'll be glad to tackle these topics in whatever way you want to. If you there are other things you want to talk about while I'm here, that's fine too. I've had the chance to work with most of you before. I think all of you. So I'm Richard Stroker. I'm with the Center for Effective Public Policy. I serve as one of its 3 directors, and I've had the chance to work with your board on several occasions now, and always found it to be delightful to chat with y'all. And Dean's always been such a great leader of parole work, really, although he probably wouldn't take credit for it, but his approach to parole decision making and your approach to the way that perhaps parole operation should occur is really excellent. And when you do speak about it, when you are willing to talk about it, I think others are always impressed with the level-headed, even-handed, logical approach that you bring to the work.
Thank you. It's a team effort.
And I know that each of you has to play a role. So when we so as I work with boards and as I've worked with boards, and Lynn, I'm already turning my back on your picture. Can you see us? What are you driving?
Yeah, I'm actually driving, so I can hear you, Richard, and I love your voice. So thank you very much.
Her car needs to go to the shop, so she's going there. She's gonna try to join us this afternoon in person.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope that the car appointment goes well and that gets sorted out for you.
Why don't you put your camera up in the windshield so we can drive along with you?
Yeah. No, it's have a guided tour, and on the left, you'll see.
Richard can get a tour of Vermont.
Yes, it's raining. Richard probably came from that direction this morning.
Yeah, I was in Burlington last night.
That's where she's headed this morning.
Yeah. Kind of a rainy mess there this morning.
Well, why don't we jump into the conditions?
Okay.
Because we did a little work on that as well since our last meeting.
Good.
And I think MJ included a copy of our memo from late June.
Yeah, I included that, and I also included some of the manual work I had presented to the board too, just so we could talk about a little bit about the policy statement that I added. Just to get some input on some of that.
Great.
So since we last met, Lynn and Pat and I, as a sort of a subcommittee of the board, worked on some revisions of the conditions, paying particular attention to the ones that we had sort of discussed when we reviewed all of them last time, that there were suggestions coming from you that, we could look at some alternative language for that. So in our memo of June 26th, it talks about the recommendations that we had. And while we haven't really come to unanimous consensus on that yet, and we have not reviewed this with corrections, which we would do once the board has proof where it wants to go.
Mhm.
I think we're pretty close to being finalized on what we'd like to change.
Great.
You know, if it makes sense to just to go through them.
Yeah, absolutely. I read through the memo and I saw this kind of the specific language that you were talking about. So yeah, certainly would be probably a good idea to walk through them. Maybe before we do that, if there are maybe just some general thoughts or comments that you or the members of that group have about what you would like to accomplish with this, because I think when we talked last time, we talked about was the condition clear? You know, was the language clear? Was your intention clear? Did you have expectations listed that the board still had, or had some expectations changed? So I think the context for it is, if I remember right, was really clarity, specificity, make sure that the language that you're using and the terms that you're using really convey what the board is trying to say.
Exactly. And basically what we did, Richard, is focus on the ones that were not very clear in a lot of respects, and not dealing with the ones that were pretty obviously clear and there wasn't an issue with it. And to some extent, we've had some challenges from corrections when we don't apply the conditions that they're asking for. And so we would have a discussion about that. And so in the end, what we've looked at is focusing on those half dozen conditions that were not clear or might have been repetitive in some way to narrow that down. And then to further the discussion about when does this get applied.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that I would like to delve into a little bit that I don't know if the work group delved into is when we apply.
Can I chime in?
And then,
Can you guys hear me?
yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of add to what Dean said, that I remember we were really focusing on, Richard, was cutting down to a limited amount of days. Like if it was electronic monitoring, stuff like that, like we made it a specific number of days. And then the other thing we looked at was cutting out some of the special conditions to not over condition, because we learned that from you. So I just wanted to add that.
And,
Good point.
and I think to really look at maybe the conditions guidance document that we had was coming from corrections, but I'm thinking, I don't know if that was really looked at, but maybe to work into the manual under each condition, kind of what the chair, the chair that's issuing the conditions is looking at to apply certain conditions. So that way we're upfront and transparent with DOC what we're looking at when applying those. So then it's clear up front when they're requesting conditions. Because right now they're looking at more of what their requirements, what they're looking at to apply a condition for furlough versus for parole.
You know, and which is typical too, is some parole officers will request many more conditions than others.
Right.
And so we're trying to develop a consistent pattern of what we apply.
Yep.
And in many cases, that's fewer than what some parole officers would request, and others are fine with whatever we're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that would then make the consistency within the board with conditions that are applied.
I see the one that I have most done is the electronic monitoring. That's when you hear, why aren't you putting that? I mean, that's when the Dean does that, put that on, I hear that more than anything.
Electronic monitoring. Precedents. And so we sort of had language that we've taken notes from your last discussion about the importance of these things and the relevance as well. You know, what actually are they going to do for us?
Right.
And put that in play.
In this case, yeah, because you've got 6 standard conditions that you apply in all cases, and they seem like very appropriate, sound, conditions to impose in every case. And so then you're into all the other possibilities and the things that you could impose if you think it's appropriate in a particular case, and you have a variety of options, and some of them can be like electronic monitoring or curfew or other things where there are kind of consequences for the individual that would restrict their liberty in certain ways. So yeah, it's kind of like, is that, when do you want to do that? When is it appropriate? When is it helpful? When does it help you accomplish your goals as a board? And when is it not necessary, or when is it not needed at that time that the condition is being imposed? So that'll be an interesting thing for us to chat about, is kind of what you're hoping to accomplish with individual conditions, and whether or not you're conveying your expectations well, and whether corrections agree with you, and whether the officer that's imposing, is carrying out the conditions understands what you expect and those things.
The pushback though in correction, until it changes that level, they're still going to not be happy if they're not giving. I mean, somebody has to give us an education regarding what value does a curfew have, or a electronic monitoring have? Where's your value? I mean, I just on a board, I think last week, and PO was not happy.
So I think this is,
Because you didn't impose?
We did not do that. We did not. They wanted to know why we didn't do it.
so this is why I think it's very important that we develop under each. I mean, I would like to go through every condition, every special condition, and say, condition 7, programming. These are the circumstances we're looking at to give this condition. Same thing with electric. And then we can then put it out there to DOC staff and say, this is how we're applying conditions. And then we can start, then we have something to go to that says, this is why,
Because right now.
and we can educate.
So what it says that, there's a reason to have it. And put
Right.
it out there, but until corrections sees that what the value of it or not value of it is, it's not that, I mean, it's gonna be an issue.
And it really is, to me, I think that's why it's important, why I added some of this policy into the manual is around, so the corrections knows that the board is looking at imposing the first few, as few conditions as possible to manage is really looking at, this is the philosophy of the board, and the more that we can tell them what the philosophy of the board is, the more that, whether they like it or not, that's a
Yeah,
different story.
Right.
No, and that's up to us to explain our.
Yeah.
And do it, and most are really understanding. I know they're not
Yeah,
always happy, but
but I think it's helpful, especially with the amount of new POs and the new and then just
Yeah.
like we said the other day at a meeting, Cassidy said, I've got 11 offices that all do different things, and it's really frustrating. So central office is working on that too.
which is typical. I mean, we deal with all 11, and each one of them is managed to some degree different.
Have their own approach or,
Yeah,
Their own fiefdom.
perspective.
Yeah.
Right. But I think, and what you're doing right now is, I think, such a healthy thing to do for you as a board, but it also really, you're getting into the why. And I think that often in our work, what frustrates people is they don't understand the why. Why do I have to do it? Or why is that imposed? Or why is that not required? It's the why that we're often weak on explaining. And so I think that maybe as you work through this and talk about it, you'll have a clearer idea about why from your perspective. And then that gives you kind of a basis for explaining it to other people. What they hate is just that it's an opinion.
Yeah.
It was my opinion and that's your opinion. And I don't see why your opinion is right and my opinion is wrong. And if you can give a why, then it turns it into a different kind of discussion. It's like, well, here's what we're after. This is why. Or here's what we're trying to avoid. And this is why. And it becomes a very different discussion in which it is just about your personal opinion or just about you. It's about a why. It's something we're trying to accomplish or do. And we can disagree maybe on whether it will do it or won't do it, but at least we'd be clear about why. So just wanted to introduce that thought.
yeah. That's it.
That's perfect.
All right. So you want to go kind of work through what the team discussed and where you want
Again, we focused on the ones, we reviewed them all in May. But there were a handful that you raised issues to give us a reason to think about changing some of these things as to what's relevant. So the first one is the curfew.
Mhm.
So one of the things we looked at here was the suggestion from you that there needs to be some timeline applied if we're going to use this, so that the parolee understands that at the end of a period of time, that's not going to be an issue if I'm doing well, and continue to do well. So we put in the 30 days. That shall abide by a curfew for the first 30 days of parole supervision if your parole officer deems it necessary. So it wouldn't be absolute, but if the parole officer, as many do, want their folks to be on a curfew when they're first released. And we could be okay with that, but we didn't want them to have a curfew for the next 5 years.
Indefinite period of time, yeah. Well, that's good, and I think
And so
that makes sense.
two phases of this. One is for the folks that we're seeing who are incarcerated
Mhm.
that are eligible for release
Mhm.
and we're putting on parole. Many times, most of it makes sense to have a curfew.
Yeah.
That period of time. For people that we're seeing who are in the community on community supervision that we're seeing for parole, and they do have a curfew as
Mhm.
part of their furlough conditions. If there's no issues, then my goal is not to add that condition to it. Right? And sometimes they'll say, well, what if we need to put it back on? And I'll say, well, you can always come back and request a modification.
There's a process for
If there's
So-
a reason to do that.
So that kind of just kicked off a little bit of, because we're now nailing this down to the first 30 days of supervision, parole supervision. I think this came up in the other conversation, is now what happens. It's day 365 of parole supervision. They're spinning out of control a little bit. They may need a curfew.
Yeah.
Are we going to have another curfew condition that's worded differently to potentially apply at that point? Because I'm saying, because this one pigeonholes us to the first 30 days of their supervision. So I'm just kind of curious how we want to,
So there could be a violation response,
right?
curfew condition. That
Or
might
just a request for modification.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so what we talked about, which is part of the big picture, is how do we do this expeditiously? Without waiting until we schedule another hearing
Mhm.
to modify it. And so MJ's suggestion, which I like, is that the PO can request a modification of a parole condition at any time they see a need for it. Then we can grant a temporary modification until the board member sitting in on a hearing can review the reasons for that and either agree or not agree. So
Yeah.
they would have the option of putting that in play right away.
Yeah, so I think that's a little bit, that's a little different than kind of what I was asking about if we do have the specific language on condition 10. What's our language going down if we,
Is there a reason to change 30 days?
no, it specifically says you shall abide by a curfew for the first 30 days of parole supervision.
Yeah.
So if it's day 365, their 30 days is already, their first 30 days of supervision have passed.
So
So are we changing the condition at that point to a different wording?
Yeah.
And that's where I struggle of having different and talking devil's advocate for corrections too, because they're gonna want it in their system of how many versions of conditions are we gonna have to try to keep straight? Which I understand the 30 days, totally get it. And value that, but what do we do if we need to apply it and not have to try to keep track of all these different versions of wordings?
I understand what you're saying. So somebody's been out for 6 months or
Yeah.
9 months or
Yeah.
what have you, and now there's a request to impose a curfew
Yeah.
condition. Would this language fit that scenario
Right.
well? And probably not. So
Yeah,
you'd have to have some additional language.
I was
that
just
you could
thinking on a
apply.
modifier that would just say unless an extension is approved or something.
right. And I remember Lori at a meeting back in June, and I haven't dug it up, Lori's our lawyer,
Mhm.
and mentioned about adding some language at the end too, in case it needed to be re-added. So I'll look at that.
Mhm. What is it, Wayne?
Just off the cuff.
Mhm.
Simplify the whole thing.
Mhm.
Change the language a little bit to abide by a 30-day curfew during your parole if PO feels it's necessary and approved by parole. So it'll be implemented anywhere in that parole.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Kind of eliminates having two separate ones of them.
but if the goal is to have the curfew applied for that first initial period of parole supervision, and the parolee understanding that at the end of that 30 days, the curfew is done unless it's needed. Why not modify that to say unless an extension of curfew is approved by the
Well, that was gonna be, before I started wordsmithing that was gonna be my devil's advocate argument in that we've heard from POs that, you know, as long as we got the thumb screw on this guy, he does wonderfully. So now we're gonna see a guy at 35 days go, yeah, and then in day 37, the PO is gonna be back and say, can I have another 30 days? So I think my wordsmithing cures that problem as well, because at day 37, you can notify MJ, I'd like another 30 days. Can we have a hearing?
So okay, so this is good. I think we're identifying some different scenarios,
Yeah.
some different situations.
Yeah.
In situations,
Trying to,
you might impose a curfew, and who can
Yeah.
impose it? And
doesn't pigeonhole every one of them.
so
Right.
So we'll break it up. Let's break it up into categories of situations. First situation is somebody's coming out on parole. And that's the language I think that you considered, and that's the scenario that you were imagining. Somebody's coming out and starting parole. And as a special condition, you're going to order 30 days on curfew if the parole officer feels it's appropriate. Okay. Now so let's take that scenario first, and let's just kind of analyze that a little bit. For people coming out on community supervision, they all get curfew when they start. So parole officers are used to that, right? They're used to managing people initially, having them under curfew. They probably feel comfortable with that. Maybe that makes sense to them. It's because it's step down, maybe they've been in an institution, now they're home, and so this curfew sounds like a good idea. So, and maybe it is, although there's basically no research to suggest that putting people under curfew does anything except increase the number of technical violations that happen. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Doesn't mean it isn't a good idea. It doesn't mean that it doesn't help some people. Maybe it does help some people, and the data or research just hasn't caught up to that in some way. But in general, ordering people to stay home doesn't seem to have a big impact on their behavior in general. Because unless you have the ability to really enforce it constantly, I mean, if you've got a secure thing and you know if they left the block or whatever, you don't really know. So it's really just a matter of, do you get caught doing it? Do people go to the grocery store? Do they go pick up the kid? Do they do this? Do they do that? You don't really know. So it's more of a rule. And then if they're observed or caught, or if they indicate that they've gone somewhere, then they've engaged in a technical violation.
It would typically become an add-on anyway, because if this guy decides he's gonna break his curfew, he's gonna violate the law one way or another.
Well, he might.
Well, he's going out for a reason, and if he gets caught for that reason, it's an add-on. It's like a seatbelt violation in this state, you know?
Well, I think
You're
that,
not gonna
yeah.
throw out a seatbelt.
And that's really probably the only time you're gonna know if he breaks that curfew.
Right, as Richard said.
Because there's not,
Exactly.
especially in some of the rural communities, there's
Exactly.
nobody watching.
Yeah, it's not like this. It's not apparent.
It's-
I guess.
Yeah.
And if it breaks the law, then obviously you'd say, man, it's a curfew.
They'll find him if they download his GPS.
So why we could PO that's.
Yeah. Yeah, unless it's
Shop.
right.
Yeah. So I'm in the community, supposed to be home, red flag.
Or they're on GPS and their every week download, they find it in the GPS
So
now.
in a violation here, when we have a curfew condition violation, we never have a violation here with just that. It's always part of.
Part of the rest of the story, the other things that the person wasn't doing properly.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's, okay, I mean, would you revoke somebody just because they had a curfew violation if there wasn't any other violation associated with it? If there wasn't some other behavior that was going on that led you to believe they were engaging in.
Like they ran out to get milk or something?
Pardon? Yeah, if they went out.
Ran out, got milk.
Right, if they went out, got milk.
And they happened to run into their parole officer.
Right, and they ran to the parole officer, that was a violation. But what I'm hearing you say is that maybe you wouldn't see that as terribly serious.
And it's probably not gonna come before the court.
No,
They'll just handle it. DOC would handle it.
Right.
internally.
Okay, so it sounds to me then that really this imposition of the curfew is kind of maybe an accepted practice as a step down from leaving the institution to going home. Maybe it has value in that POs are comfortable with it. Maybe it has value in that it does send a message to people that you're expected, to be home for a while and not be running around doing things. So maybe there's value in it. But I think it's important to understand what you're looking for from it and what you see as the value of it, so that however you craft your language and however you use it, it's accomplishing your purpose. So maybe a purpose is to get the person accustomed to being back in the community. And if that's the purpose, then having a limited duration with the notion that we'll, stop this curfew if you do okay for 30 days, because then we're satisfied that it's accomplished its purpose, which was to make this step. You're making a step. You're moving from a more controlled environment to a less controlled environment. Our purpose is to help that occur in a okay way. Person can get used to being back home, and we can get used to the idea that you're in the community now. So it accomplishes that purpose, but your time frame then can serve as an incentive. The reason you would not want it to go on indefinitely is the incentive to the person is, if you act properly and don't engage in violations and don't break your curfew, then we'll take the curfew away. We could always bring the curfew back if we think we need to, which is another scenario, which
I think, and honestly, I think curfew is more seen, because a lot of times the folks that are coming out from incarceration already have a curfew as part of their treatment, part of the residential program that they're already in.
Yeah.
So they already have that curfew as part of their program requirements. I think more often than not, I see corrections wanting to use curfew as a response to violating behavior more than them coming out initially.
Yeah.
Either MJ or Tom probably asked a question and just sitting here thinking. So, and it goes back to furlough versus parole, and the PO saying we can supervise them better on furlough. FSU does not check on parolees, but they do bed checks constantly on furloughs. Yes or no?
Not anymore.
They
They should be all the same.
We all do this.
So now the supervision model right now is supposed to be the same. It's all based on risk, not based on status. Yes. And that's, I think a lot of times, I think why we've heard it twice, I think out of one field site in particular lately, and I did let DOC know, that they can respond much quicker to furlough violations. And I think it's because they feel they have more control over the conditions, where I think if once we get to the condition modification process, that might assist them. I think they have, and I think this is where when we have our violations conversation, kind of giving more input on what the board's philosophy is around violations will help DOC as well. Because I think there's a lot of confusion of, I want them all on furlough because I've got that leash.
Right.
And I can take that leash away, or I can pull it back a little bit. Where with parole, they're like, oh, I don't know what the parole board wants from me or wants us to do. And I can't add a condition or take a condition away as quickly as I can with furlough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I just.
That's where I think that's coming from.
was doing
Dave's
bed checks.
No, Dave's doing the 3 checks a day.
No.
I didn't know if they were actually checking on parolees. I didn't think
Yeah.
they were.
No, they are.
That's the risk about it.
Yeah.
And how many checks they have to do.
If there's this guy on ELS and whatever they're working up, somebody who's a sex offender or domestic, we're going to see them a lot more.
Yeah, there's a grid about how many checks per risk level. And all of that.
Depending too on the facility, there are some times when we're rolling somebody from a facility directly. We don't impose that condition. It's not being requested, it's not a risk area, then there's no point in adding it on, so it's not automatic.
It's not a standard condition.
But if you do add it to begin parole, then having that time frame makes sense to at least establish that with the offender. And at the end of it, if it's continued to be needed, which I'm not sure that it would be, but if something comes up way down the road, we can always
Right.
reapply. Just how do we change the language?
Yeah, I think that's a matter.
But the appealing condition with the POs, the PO wants Tom Giffen unheard. If those parole board and in 30 days, I can guarantee you that will be asked emailing MJ to continue if that's something they want to do. So how do we phrase that? Certain people say, I want it.
You
And
know, and you know what though? I've seen a lot of change.
really,
And I don't know if you've seen it in the hearings, but I've seen a lot of change over the last year or so. Just in the way people are asking for conditions and
all depends what.
around super, well, and I think,
Or the individuals.
yeah,
Like asking
Yeah.
more?
no, asking for less and being more, I
Yeah,
think there's,
yeah.
it's slowly, it's moving in
I
a,
agree, MJ, there's a lot of new,
and there's a lot of new POs.
and they are very receptive to.
Yeah.
I think there are others that have been there a long time, but aren't, and they're happy.
And I think
Why can't
that's,
we have this?
and I think it's making it clear of why, because
Yeah.
we've got like some out of Barry where Jeff Smith comes for with every one that says, well, he's got this aura score, and it's a matter of, okay, it's the DOC criteria of, yes, they have a high aura score, so automatically they're getting a curfew or electronic monitoring or a housing. So it's really looking at, yes, you're taking risk into play, but it's not necessarily
And
the
you-
deciding factor.
You're also looking at the seriousness of the
Yeah.
offenses and the offender's response.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, I was looking for MJ. I know you sent it to me, but I was looking at the kind of the response, the violation response policy from DOC on the.
oh, yes, I didn't print that
And
off.
it does, to me, it looks very different. It reflects a different philosophy than maybe the first time I came here many years ago. And it does appear to be really embracing the notion we're trying to engage in behavior change. We're trying to use our opportunities to interact with people to help them get back on track. And it to me sounds like the kind of approach to the management of cases is maybe more consistent with what you're looking for. So it does seem that they're moving in a positive direction. Maybe that results in things like fewer conditions being asked for that are just kind of possible to impose or kind of be punitive in nature. Because if the issue really is how do we affect behavior, punishment is often, it's going to be a short-term way to impact behavior, but it's a long-term approach, not terribly effective. So maybe that's kind of working its way into the way they're thinking about things like conditions and violation responses.
And this all came out of justice reinvestment, and that policy that I sent you, and I can probably make some copies in a little bit. They worked with the council of state governments to develop it.
Well, I can see it. I mean, I see the philosophy in there, and if they've embraced it, then that is a change. I think that they're probably working through, and their staff is working through.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you don't want to maintain some control levers, and you don't want to, just allow people to run amok. But I think that the purpose of the interactions may be seen a bit differently if you're thinking about, I'm trying to influence your behavior. So thinking about your curfew, then kind of bringing this back to where we are, is that I think your goal then is if a curfew is something that can be imposed in a case where you think it's appropriate, so it's not a standard condition, it's a special condition. If you think it's appropriate, helpful, necessary, then it's something that you would see being done for a limited time to assist with maybe this transition process, and that you would use it as an incentive to have people behave, conform, so that the curfew could be lifted. And if you wanted to extend it, then you give yourselves the opportunity to extend it, or give the PO the opportunity to request extending it if you think it's serving some valuable purpose.
So when we first kind of drafted the language and then our application, it basically says that establish a short-term behavior change, it becomes a benefit, eliminate if they're doing well.
Yeah.
So coming back to when it's applied into language,
Mhm.
it would seem just modifying that a little bit to make that process simple for the PO if they need to go forward with that, to ask for a modification that could be adjusted without a lengthy period of time. Would make sense.
Yeah, so I would call that kind of situation two or circumstance two. So circumstance one is somebody's coming out, you're setting this language in place that can be used by board members. You can check that box because you think it's appropriate in the case, and that's that 30-day curfew expectation. That's a particular scenario. The second scenario is kind of a violation response scenario in which there's a reason maybe to impose it because of other behaviors that the person is exhibiting. So now you want to impose a condition of curfew in response to the behavior you're seeing. So I don't think you would use it as a release condition, but you would use it as a modification of conditions during supervision.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would be if this is number 10, I don't know if that's a 10A or if that's an 11 or something, but it's that the board could impose the curfew conditions at any time in response to.
And I think that our lawyer gave us some wording. I'm gonna go back and listen to the June meeting that added another caveat in there that allowed for it to be re-added.
Mhm.
So I'll have to go listen for that language.
That she thought you should have.
Mhm, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's not really a special condition of release. It's just an additional condition.
Right.
That can be imposed by the board as appropriate. And then we can talk about that as we talk about the violation side. How does that happen? You know, what does the PO need to do? What is their ability? How do you want the system to work so that it could be imposed?
So I do have a question around like the first scenario around the initial 30 days. And Dean, you're the only one here that issues conditions mostly. So I'm gonna, what are you looking at when you're looking to give a curfew condition? I'm just, okay, I wanted to get some of that just so I can, because I think that would be, because I get the application of the short, but it doesn't really go into a little bit more of the meat of what are you looking at? Because I think that would be helpful.
Well, as I said, typically if someone is being paroled out of the facility and we have input from the caseworker and the parole officer that they are looking at a curfew as a condition, that they're supporting the individual for being paroled, which is helpful. But they're also requesting that a curfew be one of the conditions applied. And so from my perspective, if there's a way to do that with an incentive to continue to do well,
Yep.
which is the 30-day issue, I'm fine with it.
So I guess I'm
If
gonna,
they are not requesting a curfew.
right.
and
So I'm
there's
gonna
no
dig a little bit
incentive,
more. So say DOC is requesting a curfew. Yeah, they're coming out of the facility. Are you looking at like the nature of the crime, their risk to reoffend? I just wanted to put it a little bit bigger so then they can go, well,
Yeah.
How many times do you find yourself putting it on if it's not requested by the? Okay.
well, I think Pat does from time to time. And
Yeah.
so I think that's why I want to try to,
Yeah. But, you know,
I would
all
say-
that on some of our.
I would say you'd be
discussions
super,
around The curfew.
I would say you'd also look at some of the STMF factors, like their community supervision, if it's aggravating,
Yeah, they got
That might-
board supervision history.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you could do then in terms of a consistency or for future efforts, you may have 4 or 5 things that you want to indicate for yourselves internally, not necessarily to
Right.
explain to
To
the
consider.
Right,
individual.
exactly.
But the factors you might consider in imposing that condition would include previous behavior risks for institutional
Yeah,
and a status prior to release.
So if someone is, for example, a high risk,
They're a high-risk
Yeah.
person and they're in an institution. And I mean, you know, they're coming out.
and they've been
and
out before.
looking at maybe what some of their previous behavior has been. You know, that's kind of a 1, 2, 3. Okay, it looks like a good case for a
Yeah, so
purpose.
that's what
I
it,
like that.
yeah, and I think just doing something like that, I think would be very helpful for DOC to know, this is what I'm looking at. And kind of combining all these factors together, making my determination.
And even if it's repetitive, I think that for a lot of your special conditions, that's what you might want to develop.
Right.
That kind of little checklist of,
Yep.
these are the things we're looking, you know, why did you impose this treatment condition? Well, because, you know, here are the 3 things that we took into account, recommendations of institutional staff, you know, the person's apparent criminal history, substance abuse use, or whatever, you know, that you're then having your own little internal mechanism for.
I almost wish treatment was a standard, because just about 99% of everybody gets it.
Well, I find that in a lot of jurisdictions that's true, but again, if it's needed, it can be incredibly important.
Yeah, no, absolutely,
If it's not really needed,
It's
then it's just another hurdle. for people.
right, yeah.
Well, and it's becoming more of a hurdle now anyway, when it is needed, because the resources just are so tapped. And I often wonder about that when they're coming, especially when they're coming right out of one of the facilities.
Mhm.
And, you know, they're already on the MAP program and they're already in a weekly group, and some of those hurdles to just get into some of these services, if you're coming in cold, can take a very.
And that's one
take a
thing that the
long time.
legislature's been working on DOC with, is that making sure that all of that is set up before they set foot out. So if there's
State
seconds.
legislator can mandate it, but the designated agencies
Yeah, I know.
can't
Yeah, I
handle
know.
it.
They don't have the resource.
And so what's happening is, from what I've seen in my own designated agency, is when they come down to do reviews and things, it's like, okay, well, you're not following this, but there's just not the staff, there's not the resources. So it's,
Yeah.
I mean, as much as the legislature orders it, it's not, doesn't mean it's always able to be carried
At least
out.
it's making DOC look and try to.
Yes.
that.
Yeah, especially in like things like when they're like, we want them in the IOP program and we want them. Sometimes there's, I mean, especially in the more rural
Yeah.
areas, Bennington's a little bit bigger, Burlington, Rutland, but
Yeah.
you know, some of those others, there's just, you know, and so how long is that going to mean to get back onto the MAP program? And it's just, is that going to cause a violation if
Exactly.
they can't?
I was talking with a parole board member in another jurisdiction yesterday, and they were telling me a story about a guy that they had ordered to go to substance abuse treatment. So the person went to substance abuse treatment. The substance abuse provider said, "You don't need to be here. You
Yeah.
don't really need the treatment at this time. You don't need to be here. Go tell your parole officer." So he goes back and tells the parole officer. The parole officer says, "Well, you got to go because it's on. You
Yeah.
ordered to go.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you, you got to go." And so he goes back.
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I'm showing up again because I was told I had to be here." And so apparently this bounced back and forth a couple of times. And finally the parole officer told the guy, "Well, just tell them that you do need treatment." And he said, "Well, I'm not really the one to decide that. I'm just the one showing up. You know,
Well,
I
and
don't know
what,
to do."
yeah, and what I find is when I do substance use screenings and when I do the assessments and they meet certain levels, whether it's IOP or even inpatient, when they're finally into a provider, the provider, I may say on my assessment of them, they need weekly or, you know, intensive outpatient, but all we can really schedule them is give them a once a month or a bi-week, because that's all we can. fit
Whatever
in.
you would like to provide.
And so I just worry how much that's going to cause either a violation because they can't get what they need, or, you know, having them back on using substances and leading to a violation. So.
And understanding it could go the other way too. The person could really need the treatment, doesn't want to go, and is, you know, just trying to
Yeah.
avoid going to the treatment, you know.
It's such a
It's a
hard thing right
complicated
now.
issue, but I guess just from condition setting and language, coming back to our
Yeah.
theme, is that have you, you know, applied the best thinking to the case to determine that that condition is needed to start with, and then kind of see where it goes after that.
We always just put on different follow recommendations, meet with the anger manager and follow the recommendation.
All the recommendations.
Yeah, just,
And if the recommendation, if they say, well, you don't need to be here at
If the
aggravation.
assessment says they don't need it, then.
Then you're done.
Yeah.
And don't get mad about it. Okay, so we've got our first scenario, we've got some language, you've got some thoughts about the
Yeah.
circumstances maybe that would warrant the
Yeah.
imposition of this condition.
Yep.
So, and we've also talked about maybe creating some additional language when curfew might be imposed later on after the initial
Right.
release, where it might also be needed. And you'd probably be looking at the little bit different factors then, because then you're not looking at the institutional release scenario or the recommendation from the institutional staff, but then you're looking at what their behavior has been in the community, maybe what the recommendation is from the PO.
Yeah.
All right, good. I like it.
So the next one we suggested eliminating, which was the one dealing with restricting associates disciplinary.
Oh, yeah.
The language that we use.
And the interesting part is that ever since you've recommended eliminating it, I've seen it used.
Used a lot.
I've seen it used a ton.
You want to get it before it's gone. Yeah.
I'm glad you noticed, Dean, because I was like, this is being used an awful lot, and we want to get rid of it. And
So tell me the kind of cases where you find it's that you think it is appropriate, or there's something that you feel is needed as a condition.
Well, I think when we first talked about it, it's coming back to my notes. It's months ago. That it was a sort of a what if condition.
Mhm.
And then if you had something specific, you had the flexibility at the end, and that a special condition that addresses specifically whatever it is we wanted to restrict them from doing, having contact with a certain person.
Yeah. And I think we've seen more cases with co-defendants or just they're out there hanging out with friends that they created, that they were involved with criminal behavior before. They may not have been co-defendants, but they're out doing drugs with their back hanging out with their same old group from before.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Two-part response.
2 parts.
Again, this is, in my opinion, an add-on,
Mm-hmm.
unenforceable.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And if it rises to somehow the level of bringing it forward as a violation,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they're ever gonna prove it in our new trial system.
In your hearing.
Because either they're gonna have to have the witness
Yeah.
positively knows him and can identify him,
Yeah.
or they're gonna have to subpoena the associate
Mm-hmm.
who's gonna sit there and say, I'm not saying anything, and I wasn't there.
Yeah.
So it's almost an impossibility to enforce.
Yeah.
And I just see it as an absolute add-on.
I don't see how it can be enforced. I think it's sometimes setting up for failure too, because in a small state like Vermont where there's limited resources, if both people are trying to access the same resource
Mm-hmm.
and they're, whether it's a food bank, whether it's,
Yeah.
anything, they're going to be in proximity a lot of times. So all it takes is one person with some bad blood saying, yeah, all it takes is one person with some
Yeah.
beef saying, I saw this person with this person. No, we're both just standing in the food line. Like,
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I think it's kind of it goes back to like a 1950s, 1960s kind of thought about managing people. Is that there are like bad people and we don't want you hanging around with bad people. And then somehow creating a condition telling you can't be around bad people will somehow stop you from engaging in criminal activity. But, what's more and more apparent, I guess, the further we all work in this field, is that what really matters is that people have folks to talk to. They have support systems. They have positive influences in their life And so instead of focusing on how bad it might be for you to be hanging around this person that you once committed a crime with, that person may actually be a mentor. That person might actually be the one person who's going to listen to you and talk to you and say, yeah, I've been down
At the same time.
the same road. Let me tell you what worked for me. So I think
Yeah.
that it's kind of, I understand that we don't want people hanging around with, people engaging in or thinking about engaging in criminal activity, and obviously don't want that to happen. But on the other hand, it's hard to write a condition to just cover that scenario without being so broad that it covers all these other scenarios in which it's just people that are living or maybe even trying to find some kind of support.
What's interesting too is during interviews, a lot of times in discussion, the offender will say, I got to manage the people I hang around with, because that's what I'm in trouble with. Yeah. And so we talk about that.
And how important that is.
Yeah.
I think it would almost be more important to have this as an option to add on if there's a specific individual, because right with the enforcement, the board never knows who the PO is restricting. And then like the evidence, where's the evidence? Did they give the person a letter? Was it in? So I think it's more that if something comes up in the interview, something comes up in a response to a violating behavior or something, when there's an actual individual, kind of like a victim.
Yeah.
To restrict an actual individual, or I think that would be more important.
So that and all the other reasons we suggested eliminating that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think clearly you want them to not have unwanted contact with victims, although that can also lead to other issues when the victim is a family member or, lots of other scenarios. But in general, for associations in general, probably you'd want to be awfully.
How to define that, how to define who an associate is too, I think is always the difficult part too.
Whose morals you want to be yours or mine.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe give that one the heave-ho.
So we suggested replacing it with the victim condition.
Yeah.
Which prior to this or currently is in two places, one in sex offenders and one in domestic violence offenders.
Mm-hmm.
So we would take that out of both of those special conditions and just add one new number 11 that addresses not having contact.
Yeah, regardless of
Unless
what your crime was, if you've got a victim and we are concerned about you having any contact with that victim again, we're going to check that condition because we don't want that to be happening. We don't want the victim to be imposed.
And the good thing with this condition is we do allow the PO to approve contact with the victim if they feel it necessary. So it's not you can't have it completely.
Case where the two work things out. The officer wants to gradually allow them to have contact and make it.
Yeah, because we were noticing it with like victims' families of murders or aggravated assaults or different assaults. This condition was getting added on because it didn't fit into a DV or an SO case.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good.
We're all in agreement on it.
Wonderful.
The next one is kind of the brother sister to the curfew one, which is electronic monitoring.
Okay. So how do you use it now? So you impose curfew now. You impose electronic monitoring in some cases. Okay.
And so the one thing that came out around electronic monitoring that was new to the board, is because it was always the impression of the board that DOC could use it at any time. Well, it's DOC's policy that they have to have a condition of supervision to use it, whether it's GPS or SCRAM. So they will not put an electronic device on somebody unless they have a condition.
Imposed by the board?
Yes.
Yes, if they're on parole.
If they're on parole. And do those conditions get imposed on community supervision cases?
Yes.
By corrections?
Yes.
So they identify some cases where they order the person to be on
all.
I don't think they put it on all of them, but I think they put it on most of them, especially if they have an alcohol or they have I think it's mostly if they're absconding or have a history of absconsion or alcohol.
Okay, interesting. So what is your,
So we came up with it, again, we used the 30-day issue, which is a bit controversial. In the same criteria that we would use for the curb.
Mhm.
And adding another caveat too, if they needed to use it again, kind of like curfew.
So is there a circumstance or a type of case that you have in mind or scenario where you would impose electronic monitoring instead of curfew? In a case, is there something about particular cases that would make you go that way?
I think the caseworker, parole officer could certainly make the case for someone who has multiple DUIs, for example,
Okay,
and they want to be able to use electronic monitoring to determine where they're going, which might be combined with the surveillance unit, which determines whether they're drinking or not. That's one option. It's basically to be able to keep track of.
I see a lot of, again, with this one, I see a lot of it getting more used. Sometimes on the initial, when they get out to keep kind of to watch where they're going at like weekly, but especially with Scram and GPS, it's more of a response to a violating behavior too. The Scram is used quite frequently in a response to alcohol use.
Mhm.
And people, and actually the individuals on supervision prefer it. Some of them wish they could have it forever.
So,
Yeah.
helps control your behavior.
well, they say that in the hearing, say that I do well when I have discretion. They know there's gonna be a reaction if they violate that, and they know that they're gonna get caught and that. But I think the electronic monitoring is just a boilerplate that the DO's put on there because they've been doing it for years. And
I think it's one of those,
Yeah.
if I need it conditions more than it is but I do think
It's the
some,
one we get the most pushback.
absolutely.
yeah.
If you don't impose it.
Yeah, I think it's mostly so they have it. Cause I don't think they necessarily, cause they have so few units that I don't think they're putting it on everybody, but they're using it as a response.
So is it that they want to be able to use it if there is a
Need.
behavior or
Yeah.
whatever that occurs during supervision? So it's really more of an anticipatory thing. Like
Yes, so what
if I need it, I want to be able to use, not so much that I want it to be imposed when the person is initially released.
Well, I could see it also being used if, and I don't know if it is, but I could see it being used if they're one of those cases that we see, and I'm sure we all see them. I know I've seen them. And just in my short time, where you're looking at this case and going, this is really iffy.
Mm-hmm.
This is either going to go really bad or really good.
Close to it.
And you're releasing them to an approved address that is probably got a lot of risk involved, potentially for relapse and that sort of thing. So the first 30 days, if they come out with it, you can kind of see, are they going to any of the known drug houses? Are they going into,
Yeah.
I could see it potentially being used in that way,
exactly.
which I think could probably be a good thing, especially if it's one of those iffy ones. But and to me, it would come down to the basis of risk.
The PO
What's the risk?
uses it saying, right now you're not on the, I haven't listened to it for years. If you're not on the monitor, right now you're not on it, and nobody wants to wear it. However, if you do the following things, we're gonna put you on it, so you need to, so they use it more of the carrot and stick kind of thing.
I see.
You're doing well, we
I
don't.
won't have to.
However, you just came back in, you screwed up here, well, then you put the thing on the desk, and this was gonna, if we had another problem, we're gonna be using it. That's kind of the,
Okay.
and it kind of works, sometimes it works, I mean, nobody wants to wear them.
So again, the evidence on the.
Yeah. It's not terribly
Yeah.
compelling
That's not-
in any way. It doesn't mean that there isn't value or there isn't an appropriate case for it. So I guess I was just trying to get a sense of this kind of circumstance. So one kind of circumstance is really, it's a violation response option. And maybe so you want to have some language that would allow you to impose it as a violation response option. And maybe we can talk about how you do that, whether you make it convenient or easy for POs to get that condition added if they think there's a situation that warrants it. So that's one kind of case. And the other kind of case is maybe, as you're describing, maybe there are a variety of circumstances associated with risk, previous behavior, location of their residence that would lead you to believe there is some additional control or
At least initially in the beginning. Yeah.
need.
Domestic ones, especially if they have a history of contacting the victim and they are living in the same town, I would have no problem with electronic signature.
Okay, so maybe those are the kinds of, so again, thinking about your own checkbox of like, what are the things that would lead us to do that? If you create your own kind of short list of things that you feel would make it appropriate as an initial placement option, then when you get pushback from POs about it, you can say, well, here are the things we're looking at. I don't really see how it fits any of these scenarios. I hear what you're saying. He might need it later. We can deal with that as a violation option.
Well, you know, Scott should drive me nuts because the guy's gonna take off. They're brings the like a vacation.
What about the one where they actually hung it on the door of the prison? Who was in that one? I remember who that one with me, but
Many cases,
I was like,
they put them in the mailboxes. It used to be another charge.
Yeah, because they don't want to pay.
and the lawyer, and the prisoner's rights lawyer was like, but she did a good job. She didn't break it. She put it on the door.
They know where, some of them know where to cut it. So they've had it on so many times, they know where to cut it, so they are cutting it in the right
It
spot.
used to be another charge, but yeah.
Yeah, she gave it
Not
back.
stop somebody from one to stop. It's
Throw it in
ridiculous.
the woods, it's a.
I know right where it is, you just didn't find it in the right spot. I love that when that comes out too, I told you.
I left it right there.
I put it on the door of the probation office.
How could you miss
Oh, God, would say you put behind the hedge somewhere, we go out there, oh, there it is. And we didn't have that many, of them. We did up to.
So there are, so which is all, this is, I think good conversation in terms of what you're looking for, what you would find as a compelling reason maybe to impose it. And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't necessarily see a great value in it in general, but there may be a scenario or a circumstance where.
Victims, I especially when they have a history of it, contacting the victims and living in the town where the victim is. It gives the victim, it gives the victim a little, more assurance, even though it really doesn't. But it does give but other than that, I don't see a value in that. Like with the history of Wisconsin, I just always bite my tongue when I hear that because.
Yeah, this is gonna stop them.
Yeah, taking on your ankle's gonna stop you.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I think that your ability to articulate reasons like that, whether it's the, past history, the proximity of the victim, risk.
But again, that's not gonna stop them going to the victim. Those gonna say that we know we went there.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily prevent it, right? At least you would have evidence of it. If you do get a complaint that, the victim is saying the person came by my house, you say, yes, in fact, we have documentation to demonstrate that. So maybe giving those kinds of, or highlighting those kinds of potential circumstances would help guide you when you're deciding whether or not to do it. Then it would also be a way to explain it to PO if you say, well, not in this case, because we don't really see any of the general factors that we think would be necessary in order to impose that at the time of release. And that's where you may then further be able to explain if it's needed in the future, there's a way to pursue that, which could be justified or merited, but not at this time.
So unlike the curfew condition, does it make sense to have the 30-day limit on there as well or not?
Well, that's a good question, because if that's the concern, that concern probably isn't going to end in 30 days.
Right.
We need you to understand that you're not just at liberty to do whatever. It's a thought about influencing their mindset. But if there is a reason that you feel beyond that kind of general transitional thinking, that you're really concerned about the person's behavior and you want to kind of monitor their movements, then I don't know that 30 days would be an appropriate time frame, because then that's maybe what your POs would say, well, that means in day 31, they can.
Well, and I think with electronics, it's a little bit different because DOC has a more concrete policy on electronics where they review the case every 30 days. So after 30 days, they have to review it
So
to
we don't
extend
need
it.
to close it.
And then I think 90 days is their max unless there's some extenuating circumstance to keep the individual on it. So I think they already have a review process built in. So I don't know
You
if
can just mirror it then.
and I think we just.
I think Lori raised.
Yeah.
When we first discussed that.
So you might, the condition would be that's imposed and would be imposed consistent with DOC electronic monitoring
Yeah.
policy.
Mm.
Which would then give that review time frame or whatever, bring it into your condition.
Yeah, I think just maybe just leaving it as is and just having those more guidelines of how we're using it. I think that would clear, why that it'd be more helpful to the POs.
Yeah, they'll get some training, it'll be a boilerplate, but then they do their list.
Yeah.
That's just when they automatically add, it, and you see it all the time. Till you change their.
Yep.
The way they're thinking.
And the more you deny that, if it's just a boilerplate thing, and you say, we're really only looking to use this or employ this in certain circumstances, like these 3 or 4 scenarios, then they'll stop listing it as a boilerplate because I would assume, because they'll learn from that this is when it would be appropriate, this one the board would be willing to do it.
And they would explain it, and they would explain why they wanted it. It would be.
Exactly.
And then you wouldn't just get affidavit
Exactly.
or.
And it gets beyond opinions.
Yeah, like
I think it is, and you think it's not. Neither of us have any real reason for explaining our position.
Good.
All right.
All good with that?
Time to domestics,
Yes.
about removing 14B and 14C.
We talked about eliminating, we already talked about eliminating 14, and 14 is the special conditions for domestic violence, which was the victim contact, which is now a universal one. 14B is for is that the programming?
Yes, domestic programming specific to
Domestic violence offenders, which is really covered by condition 7, which is the board imposing that they shall participate in programming. We could also say specifically that it would be domestic violence programming if that's they should be doing. So there's no need to duplicate that 14B. And 14C says they must abide by any relief from abuse orders the court has imposed, which is also covered by our condition 1.
Obey the
rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would eliminate any special conditions for domestic.
And I think it'll be helpful for your audience, whoever that audience is, DOC or field staff or whatever, when you talk about making these changes, is to highlight that when you're eliminating something, it's because it's covered elsewhere.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Because otherwise they'll say, oh, they're good.
Now, where was the history of that put in? That's for my, that, something, corrections.
We have always had special conditions for domestic violence and sex offenders.
Yeah.
And we modified all of our conditions years ago, but retained those 2 special conditions.
Interesting.
And their subheadings.
Because as you do your program, I mean, we already had that 2-3 spots.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. I was wondering about that one. Okay, well, you're just reiterating it.
And when we have a violation for domestic violence, particularly, it's the victim contact.
And we've been slowly whittling away because when I started, there was more domestic violence conditions. I was just going to pull up DOC's their furlough conditions around domestic violence because I think theirs are a little bit more specific around yeah. Theirs are very similar. I think theirs are very similar around the programming and stuff. So, and I know that our sex offender conditions, I think, mimic
there.
mirror their furlough sex offender conditions, because those are definitely risk-related conditions. Or the DV, not so much unless we add you shall have your intimate partner approved
Right.
by your,
And whether
Which we
it's
see those.
children, females.
yeah, we should see
I
those.
just assumed there was something you want to reiterate, make a point with, not going to do better. That's why okay. That's it. But
Well, so anyways, that would eliminate that special condition.
Special laws for special people instead of enforcing the existing laws, you just have to apply to everybody.
Well, that sounds like you're making it simpler, more straightforward, eliminating redundancies, and that's all good.
And the last one is our special condition for requiring approved residents and
Okay,
which is,
talk about that. Tell me about, that's kind of what your thinking is here.
well, in many cases, and we support it, folks coming out are required to have a residence that's approved.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they may go where they choose, live where they choose, in some cases in a car, hotel,
Not great.
under the bridge,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And so it makes sense for them to have an approved residence. The problem is we're granting parole to a number of people with that condition. And then several months later, they're still incarcerated. Because there's no approved residence.
About 3 years.
Yeah,
3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the other
Yeah,
day.
sex-
3 years.
Oh, I
years.
missed that one.
3 years.
Last week.
But I think part of that's by his choice.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of requests for that condition. And to some degree, we try to push back on it. And MJ has developed a process now where after we parole somebody with that condition, if they're still incarcerated 2 months later, we ask for an updated hearing.
Mhm.
So we bring the offender, the PO, and caseworker, whoever's affected by it, to update us on what's going on. Good, and look at.
it seems to have been working. I mean, the number of cases that we see, it's amazing how before they get the hearsay that something's in the works. So.
Yeah, I think the struggle is that there's huge wait lists
Oh,
and,
Yeah.
but before we implemented this process, the cases would just fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And this kind of gets them re-engaged sometimes.
Come before us again and talk about.
Can I ask a question? So the one that we saw on Thursday for the 3 years, so he was on the wait list for pathways in Franklin County. So he couldn't apply anywhere else unless taking his name off. Is that the standard condition for all pathways?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
For sex offender, their stance is it'll be, this.
So the one that you saw the other day on Thursday, let me just, and now you've got me. This is October.
I guess I didn't realize that, and then
So was that an update hearing or was that
No, that was-
parole?
And in
Okay,
wasn't it an in-person record?
okay, so okay. You had me scared for a minute, because when you said
Sorry.
they've been waiting for 3 years, I was like, we granted parole 3 years ago?
Oh, no.
Okay.
He's been.
Oh, that's what I thought.
Okay,
No.
okay.
Sorry.
No, I thought that's what you meant. It was granted it 3 years ago, and I was like.
Yeah, no, this is, okay.
But he's also
I was like, whoa.
Right.
Required to do community-based programs. And so
Right.
the residents and the programming are sort of tied together. But
Gotcha.
remember,
So the risk is high.
the other thing
to
is
just
he's
not-
an Addison County offender and is choosing to be in Franklin County. So as he's not anywhere.
Gotcha.
See, there's a guy here that lives in Addison County. So he's not pushing back really hard. But there's a guy that.
You had to worry for a minute, because I was like, I don't think we have anybody who was granted parole 3 years ago still waiting for a residence.
I remember part of his problem too is the Franklin County office is not really helping him.
Yeah.
Because he's not from there.
This guy,
And the Madison County offices wash their hands of them.
because he wants to go somewhere else, so, yeah.
I think part of it is his lack of desire, because like I said to him, this guy's got like 20 years in the cow business. I mean, yes, he's a mechanic. He's worked in 500 cow milking barns. He's done it all. He's got a resume for the dairy industry that's nonstop. And I said to him, I said, well, like, you want to go to the northwest part of Vermont, which is one of the biggest dairy industry areas in this state. And I know there's farmers begging for help. And a lot of them provide housing with the job.
But he doesn't want to
Well, I
go
don't really think I want to get.
He doesn't know if he wants to go back into it.
Yeah.
That's okay, that's.
Wow.
He must be older.
I remember Lori saying in a meeting
Oh, no.
He didn't like
that
it.
if somebody's plan was to go to the homeless shelter, there's no reason we would not grant parole. I remember her saying that. They asked us.
But it-
specifically.
If he's a sex offender,
Not sex at all.
I think it depends on the situation
Yeah.
about whether or not to go to the homeless shelter.
So anyways, that condition is
Yeah.
controversial. And so the only recommendation that our committee is making is that we eliminate the employment component and just focus on the housing.
Okay.
I think employment's hard too. I mean,
can't really do him.
and that's always been a controversial piece for the board too, about whether they work under the
Working under the
table,
table. and
not
things like that.
table, and so many are. Yeah, I like I like adding back in or change in residence shall be approved, because we don't want them just
Okay.
having their initial residence approved, but then
And
have
then
them
we-
going wherever they want and not.
Well, it's about electronic monitoring, we know they change residence.
So it's making it simpler and clear.
Or if you're out of state and you've absconded and I've issued a warrant for you and it's an ICOTS case and you watch the house down the road get raided by SWAT because they think you're in that residence, Florida doesn't hesitate. They just send SWAT out for you. And he called DOC here last night and goes, yeah, I watched him raid the residence down the road.
Wow.
So DOC is like, why didn't you go turn yourself in if you're watching your friends get raided when they're looking for you?
Oh my gosh.
They don't have nice jails. Vermont, we picked a guy.
I don't remember that, seriously.
Yeah, we picked a guy, they remember in Florida, the first thing he said when he recognized the two officers with pickle, thank God you're here. I still remember it.
Wow.
He was so happy to go back, and he was in Florida for several months before we got extradited. He was so excited to be back, and
Well, I think both these areas are very important. I just wanted to comment on the residence one. I have worked with some jurisdictions where boards grant the parole subject to the person getting an approved residence, and the person has sat 3 years.
Yes,
Wow.
And
we've had a few.
as you dig into that, what I see as the problem is it's kind of nobody's problem to solve except the inmates.
They can.
And they're in the worst position of all to solve it. So it's kind of like the supervision folks say it's not really my problem, and the parole board might say it's not my problem, and the institutional staff says it's not really my problem. And so it just kind of sits there.
But if we parole them, doesn't that, even though they're still incarcerated, if we grant them parole, doesn't it then automatically become the parole officer's
no.
job to?
But they haven't been released. They're
They
still
live under a bridge.
So so I think the thing that we see a lot is that, and this is where I'd encourage a little bit of guidance around using this one and what are you looking at? Because I think it's the trouble of they're on waiting lists. It's like, yes, we want everybody to be set up the best as possible when they get out. So does, and DOC's got just about everybody on a waiting list. So the question becomes, at what point do we want them out in transitional housing, or is it okay if they can go out to wherever? And that's the hard part. And the parole officers are most likely going to say, I want them in a transitional housing area.
In our interviews, if we ask, do you have other places that you?
Right,
can live?
exactly.
And you say, well, I could live with my sister, and we would say, well, sir, caseworker, is that a problem? Well, we don't know who that is, or sometimes it is, but many times it's an unknown.
Yes. So I think the question I have more around, and I think this would be helpful for DOC staff. And I think even internally as a board, because even with the update hearings, sometimes they're really quick and nice and quick. Sometimes they're not. It takes a little bit more of, do they have to go to transitional housing or not? What are those other options? So what are we really looking at, especially in the updates too? Because during an update, we can take condition 16 off if something comes up. And I think sometimes that question doesn't get asked in these updates of, do you have any, you've been here for 9 months, do you have anything else? And
For success, they're looking for transitional housing. Now, I'll throw back my 35 years of corrections. 99% of the guys and girls will have a place. But almost always, very rarely will they not have a couch or someplace to go. So if you parole anybody, the odds of them living in the bridge are really pretty slim. But where they're going, it'll probably not be a successful place for them. Like transitional housing, we have, rules and.
but how many of them are leaving transitional housing
Exactly.
quickly after they've already got there?
Well,
and
we
not-
discovered that with the apartments, everything like, they would live in the apartments free for a long time. Once they had to leave, they had a place. So we discovered that almost all of them will find a place. Would it be great? Would it think we would consider appropriate? Probably not.
So that's why I'm kind of asking this question, because if I went and pulled numbers, I would say most anybody who's coming out of incarceration is getting condition 16.
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah.
And so that's the question of,
So kicking that back to you, Tom, what should we be asking them before we make that condition?
Well, if you ask them, the question would be, where would you, if you, where would you live? Where would you live?
Yeah.
And some guy, we had a guy not that long ago, he had nothing.
we have a few of them that do have nothing.
Really have nothing, yeah.
Again, well, unless things have changed dramatically, we don't like to have, like, they will have some place. Just like once they're living in the hotels, they have discovered that once they no longer have the room, they found a place. Is it great? Probably not.
But sometimes too, like there was one that we had where the mom was more than willing to let him come there, but yet.
Section 8 wasn't there.
No, but the problem was that he had done some pretty scary things to the neighbor, and the neighbor did not want, like there was, so.
The mom was
Their mom, like
Yeah, the mom, I think the mom had been, and then also the mom had gone over to the neighbor and asked him to lie for, and the neighbor was really scared of it.
Then there's the cases where they say, well, if I get out, then I'll have more resources to go look for a place, and I'll be able to find a place to go, where I'm just at the mercy of this wait list right now.
But again, you need, part of their goal is to make sure they're successful.
No, I know.
And so, yeah, they find a place to live, and I know live at, this lovely spot, which we all know is a drug house where, I'm gonna ask Addison County. We all know that, and you know they're not gonna succeed without some programming and some secure housing, and so it's a two-edged sword. But if somebody's been incarcerated for 6 months after he made parole, I don't know if it's fair.
So let me ask you, just for my clarification, who decides if a person has, let me even back up further.
Here's a tough word that you're gonna throw out. Appropriate?
Yeah, who decide, I mean, does the PO have to indicate that they feel that there is an appropriate housing plan? Or in order for the person to be granted parole?
Well, there's rules, and they used to have things, you can have guns, I think they thrown that one out the window.
Right.
There are all different rules, and if they have a vicious dog, or if the place is caving in, and, it's.
Yeah, I don't know what the requirements
But
are.
if they say, so I guess I'm trying to understand, are you deciding whether or not the person has an appropriate place to go or a place to go?
We're deciding whether it needs to be approved or not.
Right.
Whether it needs to be approved or not. All right, so that's interesting. So if,
The corrections is going, are the ones going out, I think, right? Corrections are the one going out and doing the
Yes.
assessment.
Yes.
Yes.
they provide that information to you, so
Yes.
they say, no, I couldn't find the address or
But if
no,
this
it's
condition-
abandoned or
If
whatever,
this condition is not included,
in your standard.
they're going out the door.
All right, so regardless of what the assessment by the PO is, you could order their release on parole.
Right.
Even if correction said this is a terrible place.
Right.
Okay, that's what I was trying to
There's no
do.
place, no place at all.
So if the person comes in and you think they're a good candidate to be released, even though they don't seem to have much going for them in terms of a residence, you could still parole.
Yeah.
You could also check this box as a special condition to say that your residence shall be approved by your supervising parole officer. So let me understand how that works. So you're willing to grant the person parole. You're not really clear about what their residence scenario is. If you check this box, is that the case then where they don't get released?
Yes.
Right.
All right, so they're not released until the PO is satisfied?
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily coming back to you.
Yeah.
So if like the next week, the person says, yeah, Aunt Mary says I can live there, then that's something that the PO is.
And the reason they come back to us is 2 months down the road if they've.
Yeah.
If they're still in after 2 months, it comes
They
back.
do a review,
And you can decide whether to lift this condition.
Yep.
Oh.
or at least hear where the progress is.
Yeah, or the person writes to us and says, hey, I'm still in jail. I've got an idea. Corrections doesn't like it. I want to see the board to present it to the board.
Does that happen?
There's been a few of them.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That's a good idea.
Good for advocating for themselves, I guess.
We have some squeaky wheels, as I call them.
well, yeah, because I can imagine if the person is, from your opinion, is suitable for parole.
Like mom
and the only
telling
thing
her
that's-
dad.
Yeah, right. And the only thing that's keeping them in is they can't come up with a residence plan that you're satisfied with at the time of
Yeah.
the decision. Then,
It was a total same thing. I proved that.
Has to be approved.
Yeah.
Mom says no, dad will say
We
yes.
don't put that, I do put the condition.
so if they're out on furlough, they're living somewhere.
They're living,
But
So-
corrections,
and they will,
He's already approved that though, probably if they're on furlough.
you know, fairly commonly ask for that condition. And I say, but they're in an approved residence, they're already in.
You're already supervising it and that approved
It is because
residence.
they don't want it, they don't want them to change it without their further approval.
But don't we have a different condition for that? This is, they can't change it without notifying,
They have to notify.
or they have to notify.
Okay, which is different than approving. So I'm moving 2 blocks away, I'm notifying you.
A standard condition is that they must notify.
Okay, so that's
They'll
already,
get approval.
so that's already there.
That's a standard. condition.
Okay. So
But if the place that they move to, they don't like, can they come back and ask for a modification?
or they could say, no, we don't want to move there.
Like if they say, I've moved 2 doors down and it's a really bad place,
Right.
they can come back,
And if we don't have condition 16,
they can come
they
back
can
and
stay
ask for
there.
it.
because we,
I just, this has always bothered me. I don't know why we need to meddle into somebody's housing. And your scenario right there is, okay, he's good to go, Aunt Mary's, and now he notifies, if we eliminated approved housing, and he's living in Aunt Mary's and everything's okay, and he's not gonna move down to Uncle Tom's, and all of a sudden the PO comes back and says, I don't want him in Uncle Tom's. Well, no,
We may not.
let him go to Uncle Tom's. If he fails at Uncle Tom's, then bring him here. Don't tell us you don't want him there.
I think the only time I would have them, it would be a problem bringing him back would be if there's a risk to the community about him going, or people that live there.
But hey, but there's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
other things to hang that on other than this approved housing.
Yeah.
I think we should be able to.
if 16
release
is
the
homeless, then we don't care where they live.
Right.
I don't, I want to see him succeed. And if they're living under a bridge and succeeding, good for them.
but the odds of them living on the bridge is exceeding this remote.
Oh, I mean, my gosh.
I mean,
Exponential.
Can I go back to the approved housing now? I remember, so when you walk through the house and there's beer cans all over the place, there's guns on the thing, there's a German Shepherd that won't let you in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, this is not that uncommon, by the way.
Yeah, no,
There's,
been there, done that.
so the reason it wouldn't be approved is, yeah, of course you guys know. So, but there's a reason that house wouldn't be approved until they get rid of the beer cans and the dog and the gun. But he has a place to go with that.
But Tom, condition 6 says you can't be in possession or.
Well, it's not possession, they just have to be in the
No,
house.
but they're sitting there, they're there,
Right.
so that's a violation.
Right, could beat this around.
Oh, I know, I don't have an answer.
Why can't he have dogs, beers and guns?
Because he's alcoholic, and he can't drive, and he has beer.
But they're not-
Any history of aggression and aggravated assault.
And 96% of the houses in this state have beer,
And guns.
dogs, and dogs.
Don't think my overnight.
So, yeah, the 4%.
Not an uncommon occurrence.
And we're trying to put them in that 4%.
I don't know.
So-
It's the succeeding is the issue.
And me too.
You want,
Me
you
too.
want them not to go back to
Me
Wayne's
too.
house with the gun, the dogs, and the beer.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm shocked when I hear dispatch go off. Be advised when they're sending us somewhere or sending somebody somewhere, you saw him laugh when I heard. Be advised there's weapons in the house. No shit.
A real shocker.
I mean, maybe it's because I've worked with so many clients that have come out with this, but they come out and their initial thoughts are like, they really want to do well this time.
Yes.
And they really want to do well. And then they're kind of stuck without any resources, any assistance. They're left to couch surf. I mean, I've seen so many of those clients that wanted to do well, but to overcome that in that environment is so insurmountable.
Oh.
So and then that just leads to this cycle of like, I failed again, and it's, so-
The moral police, whose morals you gonna leave, mine or Wayne's?
No, see, I don't disagree with you.
and I think my background that kind of skews a lot of my thinking with this,
I
but
don't think we should be mandating where.
So the other side of that too, Casey, is, we hear from, especially in violations, people who transition housing, sucked it back in, relapse, because it's not always an absolute cure for them to be in transition
Right.
housing. Sometimes it's more risky for certain individuals, so.
well, and I think
To us making the decision,
Yeah.
does it make more sense not to restrict them to an approved residence and let
Yeah.
them try to be successful, or is their risk so high that, you really need to have?
yeah. Well, I think for me too, it's like, it feels better knowing that we're putting them, especially if they're high substance user and those types of things, that if they're really meaning what they're saying, if we're only approving them to some sort of a residential treatment or halfway house or something, we're really letting them try to prove it.
Yeah.
In this case, we're putting them back couch surfing in drug houses. There's no way. Like the things are so slim that they're going to be
This is a great
successful.
conversation. I'm enjoying hearing your perspectives. And I mean, you all have valid points. Everything you're saying is absolutely, legitimate. I think just two other thoughts. One is that the alternative is to keep them in prison. And in prison, they're not going to solve any of these problems. They're not going to solve their housing problems. Unless they have somebody on the outside helping, they're not going to have the job that they could have. They're not going to be supporting people they could be supporting. That's the worst place to be successful in the community, would be not even in the community. So, on one hand, that's the alternative. So, but what I do appreciate you saying is that you're going to kind of zero in for this special condition. You're going to zero in on those cases where you feel that it is important. It's so important that you'd rather keep the person incarcerated than let them out because they don't have an appropriate place to go. So to me, that's a little different conversation than just saying in general, everybody needs to have an approved residence. What I'm hearing you saying is there are some people, because of what they've done, who they are, what their situation is, what their risk is, that it's appropriate for us to continue to detain them, even though we would otherwise let them go. unless we're satisfied that their housing situation is satisfactory. Because that's kind of a different. So now we're talking about you may be coming up with a list of some 3 or 4 or 5 things.
So like some criteria
Yes.
that they have to meet.
You think that is present that would kind of lead you to check this box, as you'd say, ordinarily, even though this person doesn't have a place to go, we're not concerned about it. We're going to let them go, let them try and work it out. But there are some people we're not willing to do that. We're willing to continue to detain them until they work that out. And I think if you approach it that way, you'll be more consistent with when, and I'm not saying you're inconsistent, but it'll help you be more consistent with determining when that's appropriate. And that instead of it being the default position, which it is for a lot of parole boards, you say, if you have no kind of appropriate place to go, we're just not going to parole you until you do. That's their default position, which I don't think is terribly helpful. But I'm hearing your default position is that you would let people go if you think they're otherwise appropriate for parole, but you would require them to have an appropriate or approved residence for certain cases, certain people, certain situations. So that's the exception. Wayne, go ahead.
I've got one more question, and I'm Jim, probably throw me out. Other than the program has been defunded, although I hear this morning on the news, we're gonna figure out how to refund it in January. So take these guys that have been sitting here with absolutely no place to go. Why can't they be vouchered to a motel
Oh, the how.
with a proper social worker assistance?
Horrible.
I understand they're horrible, but there's no beer cans, guns.
Oh, really?
The other.
Really in your next door.
Have you been to
Not in
Bennington?
your room.
Okay. Have you driven by the David and Barry that they party right out there for all of Main Street to watch?
Wayne, I can
I
always.
mean, she's out there just in her wheelchair every night in her bikini.
Like top in Berlin for the top.
And let you in on this little program.
Okay.
So one person I talked to personally that was on this voucher program, she went back and said, no, I don't want to be at the Holiday Inn. I want to be over there at the Radisson because they have a pool. Transferred. Now, here's a better one. This is the absolute best. We have this voucher program, I think it's like 1,600 or it's over 1,000
11.
people on the voucher.
Yes.
1,100?
Well, no, they're windmilling it down in the state of
When we
Vermont to
were
11.
ground zero destination for the solar eclipse, people had made reservations
Yes.
from all over the country to come. And all of a sudden the motel keepers going, we can't honor that reservation. We got rooms leased to the state. You know what the state did on a Friday afternoon? They created 1,100 homeless people. Homeless.
Yep.
You're out.
They booted them out.
For the weekend.
You can come
For
back
the-
on Tuesday. You
just
can come back on Tuesday. We can't allow the homeless out the state. This government made 1,100 people.
And it wasn't,
I'm off by
Yeah.
first down.
That definitely happened. That was actually the hotels. The hotels saw the amount of money they were losing
Yeah.
by not being able, because with the state, you can only charge a set amount. But with reservations, you can charge whatever, and they saw how much they were losing. So they kicked out so many people for
Your state
2 nights and then say you can come back. And so they could charge an outrageous rate to the people coming.
Oh, yeah.
And then bring the other ones. Yeah, that's it. I cannot even tell you how much scrambling that sent the designated agencies, especially those in like the major mental health parts of the agency that they're looking for housing. It sent us in a
I
scramble.
always wanted to have my own little cable show, only in Vermont, and this was gonna be.
yeah.
Well, that's, as humorous as it is and as concerning as it is and all the other possibilities, I guess here's my question. So when the state made that decision and these people got kicked out and had to fend for themselves or try and get help from other agencies, did you notice a gigantic increase in crime? Was there any report about,
I don't think so.
you know, large volume of victimizations or any horrible consequence. Because it sounds to me kind of like the COVID thing,
Mhm.
where, you know, what the jails were saying pre-COVID was, you know, they were saying, you know, everybody who's in jail needs to be there. You know, they've been arrested, they're being detained, it's appropriate for them to be there. And then when COVID hit, they're like emptying out their jail and they're saying, wow, you know, we got an epidemic going on here. We can't keep people in here. You can't bring people in here. We got to, you know, there was no major increase in crime. So it's kind of interesting as an experiment.
Yeah.
Like, because we think sometimes when something is necessary for public safety. And then sometimes when you take it away, you find that actually the public safety wasn't particularly endangered, at least for the
Right.
weekend.
Well, and that's very true because I sat at the school when I had my school board meeting last night that I'm on. They found that with this new program and with the vouchers program ending, there was going to be 2,400 people, 1,600 of them are children
Mm. Wow.
that were now going to be homeless, and only 1,100 is going to be allowed throughout the
I
state.
thought they had children, they were not going to be.
No, you get prioritized.
But you're still capped.
So you get prioritized if you have a child under the age of 19, but they're only in the state of Vermont, they're only authorizing 1,100.
So,
And those 1,100 need to be prioritized with kids, but they're still going to leave 1,600 kids homeless.
so all interesting. We may have.
So once in a while, when we have a violation, we'll have the Prisoners' Rights Office attorneys
Mm.
bring in this group that will help provide housing as part of the release program, but they're not part of the full eligibility process. So it's left to essentially between us and the parole officer and the caseworker for DOC to decide what housing is appropriate before we release this person.
Mm.
And most of them don't have advocates outside helping them find these services. So they're on waiting lists.
And yeah. Well, interesting. All of this is interesting.
answer, Tom?
Well, no, it comes back to when do we apply it?
Exactly.
Condition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if it sounds to me like what I'm hearing you say is your default position is you're not going to keep people in prison in general about their housing or potential housing, but there are some people that you will. And for the some people that you will, you would click this condition. And for that condition, what I'm encouraging you to do is come up with maybe some criteria that you would internally review and be able to explain to others about when you would do it. And so I think that comes back to risk, and it comes back to potential harm to the community or known victims or some other specific criteria where you'd say, this person, we got to have an appropriate residence before we're willing to let them out. And for other people, not required.
Yeah.
Am I hearing you right?
Yeah.
And then maybe having those kinds of criteria established will help you as you go forward and explain in cases or to others about what your approach is. Because I think that approach makes a lot of sense. I think that's very
Yeah, especially with the limits now in transitional housing. And we're seeing people that are just waiting indefinitely.
Limits for
and
housing.
they will continue to wait.
Yeah.
So, and then the question is it better to keep someone in prison or jail because of their
That's
inability?
what we're doing.
Yeah. And is that a good choice? I mean, obviously it's the most expensive choice that the
And
state can make.
they're gonna get out eventually, because a lot of these individuals, a good chunk of them have a short max. Their max isn't gonna be all that long, so,
So you're just pushing them out to that day.
right.
It is a lot of pushback from corrections when we don't apply.
And I understand. I mean, they're thinking of it in a particular way, like
Yeah.
what is their exposure or liability, or what could they be blamed for if
Mhm.
something happens in a case? I understand that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what is the harm that you're doing by continuing someone's incarceration that you otherwise would release? And the only reason you're not releasing them is because they can't seem to find a housing solution that satisfies people. So keeping people in prison longer makes them a little worse. I mean, if you look at, again, this, if you take the public safety, the long view of public safety,
Isn't that what we hear all the time? People, places and things?
people, places.
And where are we keeping these people?
Yeah.
In a bad place with bad things.
Yeah, so they're probably gonna be not getting better in that scenario. So long-term public safety is really encouraged by giving people opportunities in the community rather than keeping them incarcerated in general. And so then when we don't do that, that's why I think you need to have criteria or explanations or an approach where you can say, but in some cases, we feel that we need to
And
take a different
and not
point.
let it be automatic.
And not let the exception swallow the rule. All right, so then we didn't get to employment. But let me just ask you then, so what is your position or how do you view issues regarding employment? I don't think you have a condition that they have a job before they get out. And I think you're eliminating, so if, in this modification, are you eliminating reference to approved employment?
Yes.
I think that's good.
I don't know why would.
We'll talk about that during the interview. What your plans for work, so maybe on disability, so they have extensive things they have to accomplish before they can start looking for a job.
Yeah.
Programs.
And then you're trying to assess kind of what their situation will be in that.
That comes into their original.
And honestly, I don't know if I've ever seen a condition 16 violation for employment. It's always around residents.
I think the employment, when they put it in, was for the under the table group, because they want,
Yeah.
they used to have to come in with their check stub, show that they were.
Let's let the feds deal with that. We don't.
They said they come in
Let's IRS, let's
Employment.
Well, the only time,
deal with that.
the only time I would ever,
That's the only reason that would be in there, sure.
the only time I would ever want the employment condition is if it's a sex offender that's gonna go work at like Taco Bell because they let all, like, there's so many offenders that work there that just
That's the.
Yeah, I think
like
it's covered.
grade on some of the younger girls that they, at least the Taco Bell in Bennington. I don't know about anywhere else.
And those are the reasons for the sex.
Yeah.
That's why I guess.
Yeah.
All right, well, so to recap then, I think it sounds like all of the modifications that were suggested, the group has endorsed.
We've modified some of those today.
I think we've made a couple of changes to them. I think that the establishment of criteria for the special conditions that is not necessarily listed on the condition itself, but is for your benefit and to help with your own application of your rules and to perhaps explain to others that might be concerned or interested, will be a good development as well.
So what I can do for October is bring all of these back with the additional language and maybe Dean, try to get a meeting with DOC in between before our October meeting.
Okay.
And go through some of this and then we can finalize it some
That's
more.
a board vote to approve the changes.
Great, good work.
Thanks for your help.
My pleasure.
I have lunch coming about 12:15.
Okay,
So do we want to talk about the condition modification?
yeah,
Yeah, let's finish that.
And then maybe we can wrap up conditions before lunch?
okay. So currently, all right, so you've got excellent standard conditions, you've got a revised shortened list of special conditions, you've got criteria that you're going to put in place for special conditions when you use them. So now the case has moved forward, the person's been released, they're in the community, and now there is an interest in modifying the condition. Probably because of something that is not good that's going on. So there's a desire to either add something or to extend something. So tell me, how does your process work now? If the PO wants to add a condition?
We have many fewer requests than we used to. And part of that is because the last time we revised our conditions, we eliminated some of those conditions that obviously required it. For example, if you're a DUI offender, and we made a condition that you can't drive a motor vehicle. Well, if you do the things you have to do to get your license back. They would have to come in and modify the parole agreement to allow them to drive.
Right.
We don't have that sort of thing anymore. So now it's very seldom used. And I'm thinking if we change to some of the things we've been talking about, we may get a request more often.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't have the electronic monitoring, we might not have the curfew or the resident issue. And then somewhere down the line, the PO decides that things have happened where they feel they really need it. They can request a modification, schedule a hearing during their regular hearings for that reason. And so they're adding or removing a condition.
So modifications require a hearing and a decision from the board.
Right.
Interesting. Has it always been that way?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a good idea? Is it required by statute?
I think it's our policy. But what MJ has suggested, and one of the things we've talked about is how do we make this easier to accomplish and more expeditious?
Mm-hmm.
And this proposal would essentially do that.
All right, well, let's talk about the proposal.
So MJ's proposal is so we have to the state highlighted section that says prior to a condition modification hearing, a parole supervisor may be temporarily modified by the parole board chair or director prior to when the board actually hears the hearing request. This condition modification would be temporary until the formal modification is resolved.
Okay.
So as I see it, if a PO wants to have a parole agreement modified, we could get a hold of MJ. We could administratively agree to temporarily modify the parole agreement until the board meets and then considers permanently modifying the parole agreement.
And I know you have a very formal process. I know your hearing process is fairly formal, and you've got attorneys and
Only for violations,
only for violations, not for release.
not for release or not for modification.
So for modifications, I was unsure where that fell. So if it's modifications, it's the board. You have the PO and the parolee attend, and you make the decision in that context. All right. So it's not as formal as I thought it might be.
But it's not unusual either to have the Prisoners' Rights Office attorney advocate for that, even though they can't legitimately represent them.
Mm-hmm. But they might show up too.
You know, especially with the conditions for residents. It's not unusual for them to be reaching out to ask us to consider not imposing that.
You may not be representing them, but it seems like they are.
Yeah, yeah,
They
exactly.
kind of act like that.
Yeah.
How long do these kind of hearings last usually? Is it
5 minutes.
Minutes.
okay?
Yeah, they're pretty cut.
Well, usually it's not much to them. It's like, no, like I said, it's nice one, like the cars and perfect. Of course, we're going to improve it. But it's nothing to say, well, the guy hasn't been doing, no, he's been drinking again. We want to add the condition that he has.
Or he's been out all night, we
Right.
have to add the curfew.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Do you do them virtually? Do you do them in person?
In person. I'm sorry, all our hearings are, via Teams. So we're not physically. with them.
Okay.
Yes.
We look at the name modifications anymore.
No, we don't
I
anymore.
can't remember what that's what happened.
But if we're advocating for using fewer special conditions,
Mhm.
improving the access to modifying it seems to make sense.
So would a hearing be needed if somebody wanted to remove a condition? To be less restrictive?
Doesn't happen right now.
It doesn't, I imagine it's usually more the other way. They want to add something.
So do we want to have the hearing at all?
I guess that's kind of where I'm going.
Yeah.
Is if it's kind of a swift, quick review, how much value is there in having the hearing? How much do you really learn from the hearing that you don't get from the paperwork anyway?
Right.
I'm just kind of curious.
So if it could become a liberty issue down the road, you may want to have a hearing.
Well, that's why it was one of the reasons I asked if it was taking things that, if you're adding things and you're being more punitive, then it could also lead to new violations associated with whatever you're imposing. If you're taking conditions away, I can also.
If it's for a positive thing, I don't think we need to have a hearing. I'll put that. But if it's something that could eventually be a liberty issue that down the road, if they're adding something to it, I think you need a hearing.
So, and kind of that's where I was at a little bit. Sorry, I had an arrest. I had just had a police department call me. I think where I was coming from when I wrote this quickly, in just my initial brain dump, was more about a lot of the time people are wanting something to respond to violating behavior. So at that point, at what point does the board want to know to make this condition permanent or not permanent? Or is it a quick fix, not a quick fix? And that's why I initially was thinking, if we're adding a condition on the fly like this and it's more in response to that, should we then be having a reprimand hearing the next month just to talk about that violating behavior if there's a need? If it's just adding or taking away a condition, I think that's different than when you're responding to something, but I don't know. And I think I'd be looking at the board because I know historically when we've talked about condition mods, it's like, I want to be in control of these conditions. I don't want DOC kind of to have the liberty to add or remove kind of thing. So it's just that kind of feeling of that kind of thing. I don't know.
Okay, no.
How big an issue is it right now? How many do we get, say, a month or a year?
So here's the thing is I think there's a lot of talk out there of they would like to be able to respond quicker. We don't get condition modification. I mean, if I looked at the data, we don't have condition modification hearings very often. Most of the time when we're modifying conditions, it's at a reprimand or a violation hearing. And it's usually in response. And that's where I'm thinking with this curfew, with the electronic monitoring, we may.
That's where it is.
And will we see this more if we are allowing a quicker, smoother option? Because a lot of times they're like, I'm just going to let them be because I can't. By the time they actually can come before the board, maybe it's already. And I was looking at this more swifter option. Say it's a Friday, maybe we can impose it on that Friday instead of waiting until the board convenes the following week.
I don't have time in the play.
So I was just.
Fine. I mean, if that's what you want, but
I don't know. I'm just trying to.
I mean, if there's gonna be a lot, you think, what's your scenario? I would have no problem with that. But my only issue would be is something they want to put on that could eventually go down the road, be a violation. That I think we should have at least the same. But what's your scenario? I don't have a problem with that. You want to, because a lot of they say we want to do this for this reason. Fine. Makes sense to me. It's temporary. It's not a permanent thing.
Yeah. I mean, and then what is the trigger? Does the board need to review it or do we just have it expire on that date? And if they see the further need, we schedule the hearing at that point.
Okay, well, allow it to go.
Right. And that's where I was looking at is say,
30 days.
well, I was thinking it would expire on the hearing date.
Oh, here we are, hearing day, absolutely.
And then if they still feel the need past that, we would have that hearing.
Oh, okay, I got it.
That's more of what I'm thinking. So have it expire on the next hearing date. And if they felt like they needed it further than that, then
They
we
could
would.
choose whether to bring it forward as a
Yeah.
modification or not, or a reprimand.
Right.
Fine.
That's kind of what I was thinking. So that way you have this temporary use. And then if the need continued, then we'd have something more formal.
Okay, I have no issue with that. That sounds good.
And it was how to explain that.
Give some the offender a chance to clean up their act and he also.
It's kind of like giving like a graduated
Right,
sanction in a
exactly.
way.
No, I think that. Fine.
That sounds good.
Well, the research will suggest that the quicker that action is taken, the more impact it will have on behavior. So by making it easier for people to maybe take some initial
Right.
actions in order to address a behavior, probably will have more impact on the person. So quicker is generally a good thing. So let's see if I understand where you're
Yeah.
winding up then. So if the desire is to impose a more punitive condition or to something curfew, EM,
that you don't have.
that you don't already have, for those, you would like the flexibility. Well, you're going to have a hearing ultimately in those cases,
Maybe.
maybe.
Yeah.
And that you'd like to have the flexibility for the PO to be able to take action immediately pending the outcome of that hearing.
Then the hearing date comes, they don't think it's necessary, then we're all free.
Then problem got solved and
Exactly.
then no hearing might be needed.
You don't need it here.
If you- if you're eliminating a condition, so let's say there was a EM or curfew or some other condition has been imposed and the person wants to modify the PO is suggesting the condition be modified, that would also come to you. Do you also want that to go to a hearing?
Yeah, if something's getting removed, would you want that to go to a formal
How many times
hearing?
did that happen?
I think we've got one now where we want to remove some and add some.
Yeah, well, how about just totally just remove one?
It doesn't happen very often.
Very
Yeah, I don't, so it doesn't have any. And I don't think that's something to worry about. It doesn't get, it rarely happens.
I would say if it's a removal, I think we would just do our normal condition modification process unless there's a
Yeah.
really good cause to remove it quicker than the next hearing date. But I think it's the addition, I think it's the adding that is the bigger issue than the removal
Okay. And the ability to add it quickly.
quickly especially to
I
respond.
mean, you could have the approval of the residents be an issue.
Yep.
You could have a curfew that's beyond 30 days be an issue. But beyond that, there's not one.
Yeah, I think the one that we've got now is some tweaking of sex offender conditions.
Yeah.
And that is more, I'm thinking that would come to the board anyway, because they're not asking for the immediate. It's like,
Right.
wait a minute, when he was granted, we had these issues or we didn't have these issues and we checked the wrong boxes kind of thing. Because we really look for DOC when it comes to those sex offender risk conditions to be the experts.
Okay. So my only other question then is, does the PO have the authority to take that action? I know you're looking at changing your
Right.
policy, but is the parolee notified that their conditions can be changed by a PO?
Well, and that's the question I have for the board is, do you want the POs to be able to modify, or do you want it to come through our office to modify it?
Well, I think it
And
needs to
issue
come
some
through.
kind, and issue some kind of form with that expiration date on
Yeah,
it.
just an administrative approval for the temporary addition of that condition. As you outlined.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So especially since it doesn't get lost in the cracks if we're looking to.
They would email the
Do another
parole board
violation.
office. I would, kind of like a warrant request. I would review it. Then a form would get filled out. We'd send it back, and then it would be clear that this expires on such and such date. And then the individual would be able to sign it and get a copy of it too. So they know it's coming from the board, not just the PO.
And if they wanted to make it permanent, here's the process.
Yep.
Sounds like a winner.
That takes care of the immediacy issue.
Yeah. We take care of the higher supervision level of furlough. I really think that's the only, I think that's the bigger reason, is really that quicker response.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get to the bottom of it. One of these days. One of these days.
Well, the legislature is going to at some point too, when they eliminate community supervision.
Maybe.
Are they talking about that?
They've been talking about it for years.
For a while.
But there is significantly less community supervision.
I watched the oversight committee hearing the other day. I can't see him putting in anything.
Are you gonna watch me in October?
I'm always watching that. So you're going to oversight?
Mhm.
I-
Go and talk about earned time.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
What is there, they want to eliminate or reduce or restrict,
Get rid of it.
get rid of it, and what's the alternative then?
Parole.
Pearl.
So no furlough any.
So
The ultimate goal, so with justice reinvestment, the goal was to reduce furlough and put more folks on parole, because parole used to be looked at as a step down status.
Most states don't have. It's a weird, you talk to those states, you hear about, we have furlough, they don't understand it, they say, why are you doing that? I mean, it's, in other states, when you're men, you make parole.
Some states, they invent something to go around the parole board,
Yeah.
around the
Yeah.
parole process, and it sounds like that.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And usually, ultimately, those, whatever the reasons were for going around parole, it gets determined that that's really not the better way to do work. It should go
It
through.
made our jobs a lot easier because we never saw anybody until they were in the community for at least 6 months.
That was, yeah, the go for parole, yeah, but see how you do it in 90 days or whatever it was, yeah.
Yeah, it changed
Yeah.
your kind of cases you're looking at.
So he behaved himself for 6 months, made parole, right?
Well, maybe you go back to the old days and you'll get people who aren't in the community and need maybe a little bit
That's what,
different kind of considerations.
yeah, that's what we've been, and that's been that was the big culture shift back in 2020, 2021 was now they're coming before the board more. The numbers of paroling out of the facilities are now a lot higher than they were.
Mm.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing.
It's more violations, so.
Yeah, and we knew it would be.
But we're managing without adding hearing days. We've only added one hearing day potentially a month.
Well, very good. Well, have we wrapped up then?
Yeah,
The
so
interest in the conditions and changes and the language and the criteria and the modification process.
Just overachievers.
Yeah, that's very impressive.
So I think
Did all that before
Finish
lunch.
for yourself.
Yeah.
so what I'm gonna do is just for the record, I'm gonna pause the recording and pause our meeting because we are gonna take a lunch break and we'll reconvene around 12:45, 1 o'clock.
Very good. Here we are.
Here we are.
What a nice food.
Well, as you recall, we have been implementing structured decision making this year, so that has been helpful in referring back to some of the information on the cases that we did structured decision making on the violation to give us a background. But we still don't use any kind of a matrix or assessment tool for our violations. And I think that's maybe the one thing that's lacking to really some real serious consistency issues, you know?
And that's kind of where, because I kind of took this one on, and that's where I was been mulling it over in my head, and that's where I was struggling a little bit. So I was looking at some of the ones that you gave us last month,
Right.
and some of them are quite complicated and some aren't. I kind of liked Minnesota's a little bit, where it takes in some of the severity, the mitigating, the aggravating, and that's kind of where it's actually kept coming back to our old one
Yeah.
and making it more of looking at the risk, looking at maybe not necessarily the violation severity, but more like the violation type. kind of, it's separating it from the severity, but is it technical? Is it a new offense felony? Is it a misdemeanor? And then I was also thinking about if we could identify some mitigating and aggravating factors, which I was looking at some of the responses to furlough violation policies for DOC that I knew they worked with CSG on, which is what is in your packet. Some of it. And I also did some tweaking of my own. It's got a blank page first. It printed in the wrong order. So it's on the back side. And really, I wanted to have a conversation as a group about when you're faced with a violation, when we get to disposition, what kind of factors are you looking at? What are the things that really are affecting whether you're going to revoke somebody or continue somebody, and really kind of identifying that? Because I think once we have some of that, then it's going to lead us more into a matrix.
I think the severity of what the violation was, I look at. If it was again, it was not doing curfew, there was that. No, I was if it's something that was like new charges, even if it's a misdemeanor, I looked back very closely with new charges, severity of offense that they did. How he'd been doing up to that point is a big one. He's been doing fine for 5 years, and then he had a big bump in the road. I mean,
one of the arguments that seems compelling to me a lot of times is when the attorneys argue that this person can no longer be supervised in the community, that they just have no means to be able to handle. They tried everything, conditions don't work, they just can't manage the community. So then what?
All right, can I bring up a case? I'm looking at YouTube because it's from the other day.
Yeah.
So for me with the Prue case, I felt like all of these were concerning to me for that person. The YouTube trumped me. You were not me. Matthew Prue.
Wayne turned, really?
Yep. He swindled.
Well,
Wow.
I didn't.
He was on the same page, Sam, you just didn't recognize.
I didn't turn, but
I've seen him turn before too.
he made a semi-convincing argument.
Can we just talk about it? Like why?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I struggle with so I think if we're gonna look at more of a matrix way, how to stick to, and I think that's where we come to of sticking to that matrix, because so often these cases can take every S turn in the road, and there are a lot of similar cases that have completely different outcomes, and it depends on which three are sitting there some days. Right, and some don't.
Yeah. This was a case where the evidence that came into the hearing was much different than the case was portrayed initially. He was charged with, I think it was operating without the owner's consent of a vehicle that was his mother's, that he was living with, who was a witness and testified that she did not, that the vehicle was not stolen, that she intended to give it to him, that she didn't want him driving it because she didn't want to be responsible if he was in an accident.
Right.
It was in her name.
Right.
But that it wasn't stolen, and she intended to give it to him. Which I love.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Totally get it. You don't have to explain that to me.
I struggled with that was that she wrote a statement that he did steal it, but then she testified that he didn't.
He pressed charges.
Because this happens, this is routine.
So the other issue you had, pretty clear, the PO was not happy with our decision.
Right.
And the PO had since left the department.
Yeah.
But she came back for the hearing, which was great. But she made it clear a couple of times in the hearing that she wasn't happy that we paroled them in the first place.
Right.
Despite the fact that there was a good parole plan and so on. Then we had another witness who came in and testified that he was pretty seriously ill for some time and was hospitalized. by his account, whether it happened or not, we don't know, but it wasn't refuted. He tried to report to his parole officer. I think by that time she'd already left the department.
Right.
It was kind of falling through the cracks as to whether or not
He really was or
who
not.
else was taking care of him
Right.
at that point. So a lot of circumstances that kind of explained his behavior. And so in the end, and he'd been incarcerated for I think 2 months at that point.
Mhm.
And so we talked about keeping him on parole with an incarcerated sanction of an additional 30 days. But based on the totality of everything, not revoking.
Right.
So it sounds like to me, so we have these, what we're looking at, the severity, the how long, but then Dean just explained some of the mitigating. So we have the aggravating factors and then we have the mitigating factors. And I think that's where,
Well, and I think for me with this specific one is he had had 2 absconsions in the last year too, which is something that I was like, well, why are we giving him a third try if he's already done, you know what I mean?
But what were the absconsions?
Yeah.
Because we just barely put him on. That was from a previous parole.
Was it? Cause in December,
See, I think when we had revoked his parole the first time, and he was sent back to jail and then was eligible for parole again. That was from the previous.
he was revoked.
application.
He was
Oh,
revoked in
okay.
January. He got a new min and was seen in May.
oh, okay.
And he had no, she didn't press charge, so the charge was no longer there. See, but they,
The charge.
the
The theft,
operating.
the auto.
Consent.
So I don't know if she pressed charges. 'Cause she-
DLS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
He'd be eligible for community.
Yeah.
release.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know.
Right, you were right.
I struggled with that one, so I just wanted to talk about it.
It's good to talk
No,
about.
we wanted to revoke them.
But I actually think as we're talking about some of this, I think it's getting some of those factors out. And I think that's where developing a matrix without clear cut,
Yeah.
what are some of those aggravating and mitigating factors?
So typically, Richard, when we get to decision-making time, 3 of us will go into a separate room and talk about all the issues and then decide whether we want to revoke, continue on parole, add conditions, whatever.
If the PEO said that they were gonna be looking at community release, that would also have been okay, that's.
No, they were looking at a 2-year.
Oh, they were 2-year interruption?
Because he had an interrupt that got overrode, right? Cause she
Well,
wrote
we
that
told
out.
him he was not, his interrupt had not been fully satisfied.
Right.
Oh, we got-
So
We
he got,
sprung them from his interim.
so I think that was part of it too. Cause, and the PO was very adamant, like he belongs in jail, I don't want him out. Cause she said that a couple times, which I'm not, she, like, not saying that she should have said that by any means.
But
Really,
There was clearly bad blood between her.
Mhm.
Big time.
the only solace is with a reasonable degree of certainty. In the next 6 to 9 months, we will be violating them.
yeah, I'm gonna be a hard no again.
Yeah, but I know that we can probably say that about, a percentage of the ones we see.
So
Like, oh, he'll violate and we'll see him. But the reality is like, when I hear that, the only thing I could think of, yes, but at what cost to?
Yeah.
What cost to the community that
Right.
he's going to, yeah.
He was working, remember, he had his employer come in that's previously.
Right,
She said that she would hire him back, that he's very talented.
Okay, so I'm gonna just, I know we're good, having good talking. So I just heard a mitigating factor, employment plan.
No,
Okay, so,
there was no employment.
so she,
no, but is that something you're considering?
She
Is your-
testified.
So I'm not talking about this case specifically, but I'm thinking in all the deliberations I've said, and I'm more talking about what are the factors we're considering? I don't think we need to keep going through this case
No.
necessarily,
No.
but what factors are you considering in making your decision? Employment, treatment, resident,
Well, clearly the seriousness of the violation.
That's the most. That's the biggie. That's the public safety thing. But if somebody, the other thing is like, if somebody was on parole for 2 years, screwed up and did a stupid thing, And they say he was drinking and driving, whatever it was, and he went to rehab, didn't follow through what he was supposed to be doing. And I see he made the effort. I would look at that very, very positively.
It's not very often, but occasionally you get, this was pretty obvious that this PO did not thank him.
No, there's,
And that, which is not something we can resolve. I mean, that's up to corrections to do. But it was pretty obvious.
Sometimes the PO recommendation I have to look at too. They say he's been doing well. You could, and they said, well, we were looking at violation, but you know, you can tell that there's that they've been, he did not cause a PO any problems up to this point. But the big thing for me has always been the severity of the offense and what he's been doing, being out getting.
Okay, so let me play this a little bit more, because I keep hearing severity of the violation, how long they've been on supervision.
Employment is good.
And so basically you're looking at disposition. How can I rectify? So the factors that you're looking for are, what's the plan going forward? Is it, how do I address what my violations in a way? I'm looking for a little bit more meat to this.
I'm looking at the positive, what has been positive in his account, which we're talking about. And then I weigh it against what's the negative part. And then that goes with the public safety.
Okay, so what's the positive things you're looking at are treatment, residents,
behavior in the community,
reporting to the.
Yeah, doing what he's supposed to be doing with
What's his plan?
what's the plan going forward? What has he done? And again, if he owns what's done, and he said, I want to go treatment, I want to do this, or but again, each one's a little different, so it's.
So the one thing so here's the next thing I'm gonna throw out there, because the one thing I didn't like about this matrix is is there any case that would be an automatic revocation or an automatic, because the one thing I didn't like is we always had a choice for every option had all the same choices. So it was never an automatic revocation or an automatic continue. There's only one chance, a couple chances for an automatic continue. And that kind of thing.
Which was
James
James Austin.
Long time ago.
That was clearly, we did not want to be locked into.
Right.
Not ever having the option to continue something.
Yeah. No, and I get that, but I just want to just kind of, is there a way to kind of make this a little bit more bucketed so it's a little bit more straightforward to a board member coming on of, when am I supposed to be considering revocation? When am I not supposed to be considering revocation? Because I think I just heard that a little bit, Sam, from you. And I've heard it from Katie too, in some of these deliberations of like, it's always that gut feeling. And how do we take that gut feeling and make it into something?
I think that's a huge, and I've kind of said it always from day one when I started. I think I tend to go more with my gut, using my knowledge of like mental health and stuff. And so I just kind of, it's really hard not to look through that lens on things. And like, so when you're looking at like those mitigating factors, for me as a therapist, I want to say change talk. Like, what am I looking for? But that's not something we can use. But it's something that I naturally kind of go with.
To a degree, to me, when you heard change talk, that actually for me would be something in a disposition for a violation that you would want to be listening to. Okay, I did this, because you're getting to disposition because they're saying I did this. How are they changed, and what am I doing to not do this again?
Right. But I think, and sometimes that change talk, like for me, it's not always so cut and dry, because I think there's always little subtle nuances that I look for, like when I'm in sessions with people that might not be as easily picked up. It's not so black and white, but it's hard to shut that off for me.
Of course.
So that's where I struggle with it a little bit.
But I think some of that's good too, because I think it's always what's being fed at you. Is it a bunch of
Right.
Or is it a bunch of, is it true?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm trying to hash out a little bit of what you're really looking at.
So one way of thinking about it then is, I think when you talk about the severity of the violation, That's one clear kind of category. So you could take the severity of the violation and you could say that there's the commission of felonies. There's, commission of felonies where no person was injured. There's commission of misdemeanors where people were injured. Misdemeanors where no people were injured. You could rank order them. That's what some boards do. They'll like rank order kind of all of the potential violations. And they'll say, we would say these are the most severe. We would say these are in the middle. We would say these are the least. And almost everybody puts technical violations with no harm to another person, no threats to others or whatever would be at the bottom. So then you have one kind of scale to look at. So on that scale, you can say this is a kind of a level 2. This is a felony, but no one was injured or something. Another scale is something about risk. And risk is a thing you can think about in a lot of different ways. There's like an objective risk assessment, which is a projection about the future. So you could consider that to be your objective risk score. You could say, well, it doesn't mean that somebody will act out in the future. Somebody who scores out as very high risk, or maybe more concerned about than somebody who scores out as low risk. Doesn't mean the low risk person would be perfect, but that's another way of thinking about it. But I think the third thing I hear you talking about is something about stability.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're thinking about, how long has the person been under supervision without a violation? Are they employed? Do they have reasonably stable housing? What is their situation? Are they going to treatment? You're really trying to get a picture of the stability of that person or instability. Maybe none of those things were true. Maybe you don't know where they're living and they're not reporting and they're not going to treatment. And your concern is that they're acting in an unstable way or a less stable way. And that would concern you. So if you took that with a higher risk person who's acting in a way that you feel is not very stable, now you've got a reason to be more concerned about that person. So then you look at the severity of the violation. Maybe the violation was so low that you're willing to accept that risk. Maybe the violation is so high that you're unwilling to accept that risk. So you put those together and you go, okay, serious violation, concerns about their risk, and they're acting in a kind of unstable or unstable way. That seems to me like one kind of potential case. And if you all looked at that case the same way and thought about those 3 factors the same way, you might want that person to spend some time to get kind of in a better situation. Yeah,
You actually just explained, that's exactly kind of what I was thinking. I just didn't have the word stability, but yeah.
And that's what you could do is you could then take stability and take those kinds of factors like residence, employment, length of time since last violation, participation in treatment, or any other things that you think are relevant, and put them in your stability box so that when you're talking to each other about a case and you're considering the same factors, you can say, yeah, I see, this is a case that looks like that. It's moderate violation severity, moderate risk, pretty stable person. I'm probably going to keep that person in the community. Now you're all talking the same language when you're talking about the case. It doesn't mean that you'd always agree or that you'd always reach the same outcome, but you're at least approaching it with the same kind of starting point in the case. And then you might say, yeah, normally I'd be okay with it, but in this case, look at what he did with ex-wife, or look at this or look at that. There's some other thing that catches your eye that's maybe more important than anything else, and so it would guide you. But I do think if you take objective risk, objectively thinking about the severity of the violation by organizing violations in some way, like you essentially currently do that you have done in the past.
Yeah.
And then think about stability as a third factor. Then I think you now have a foundation for consistent decision. So that would be a suggestion.
The ones that I get beat up are the ones that we agree, everything you said I agree with. So we have a guy who's usually a drug related or alcohol or something, and they go, well, I'm going to treatment now. Now I'm thinking, well, okay, he's going to treatment now because he knows he's going to jail.
Right.
Or he's see the light.
Right, he anticipated.
Yeah, but those are the ones that always bother. But the other hand is, I'll give the crap for because, well, we want them to go to treatment. And as he also said, the Apple Boy Scouts, right, probably none of them are Boy Scouts, but those are the ones that bother me because they said, well, I want him in treatment. He had the opportunity to go to treatment months before and he did this. So now it's as MJ just said, it's no BS.
Yeah,
Well,
but I can tell you, it takes seven,
Yeah.
on average, it takes 7 times
Yeah.
doing rehab. And I think I don't care if they're afraid of jail or if it's because they really want to change, that's a much better place for them than.
Well,
They're gonna get more of that.
I agree.
there.
and the thing that I struggle with kind of in treatment, Katie, you might be able to help me understand this a little bit better, is all the times when it's like the recommendation is inpatient treatment. And I know that we have so little inpatient treatment in Vermont.
Yeah.
Is that always the best option? And it just seems like that's the way we're always in disposition. That's what comes up so frequently.
Well, my first thought on that would be, who is the one recommending inpatient treatment?
Yeah.
Because if it's a probation officer, a parole officer, or a DOC attorney, like, how are they qualified
That's
to say? Like, the only way someone could say this person needs inpatient treatment is if they actually go by a licensed mental
Right.
health clinician and have a substance use assessment.
well, and I hear that in board deliberations a lot of time. Well, I think they need to go to inpatient treatment. I'm like sitting here going, who on the board is qualified to make that decision?
I take to do that.
Not within those few minutes that I see him in front of me, I can tell you that. Usually those are at least an hour and a half.
I hear sometimes folks going, I want them in treatment. It's like, but you,
So what I think in those cases, we need to kind of throw it back on the people making those statements and saying, what you're really saying is not that you want them in treatment. What you want them to do is you want them to go have a professional assessment done.
assessment.
And that's what we really need to be requiring here is the assessment.
So here's a thought, Katie, in a lot of these cases.
No, I'm not doing them all for everybody.
So when we're having cases like this,
Mhm.
one of our options is to continue disposition and give them an opportunity,
Mhm.
a period of time, which is reasonable, to get an assessment.
Yeah.
Come back with the assessment, talk about the recommendation going forward, and then make our decision.
Well, in all the designated agencies, per the state guidelines for being a designated agency, is if they're requested by Department of Corrections or something like that to do a substance use assessment, they have to schedule those in order to keep their Medicaid funding. So it's not like the designated agency can say, oh, no, we're just not going to do an assessment for that
So,
person.
and that's how.
And so it could give them time.
For certain ones, that would be.
Yeah.
Beneficial. There are others that really need to be reincarcerated, get on the MAT program. And begin thinking about going forward with,
Yeah.
because until they get to that point.
And even if they're on the MAT program while they're incarcerated, when they come out, if they want to stay on one, they're going to have a substance use assessment anyway. Because from what I'm hearing in some of the cases we've heard, there's people on the MAT program that should not be
That's
on the MAT program.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
very,
and it just floors me when I'm like, you don't really have a substance, but you're,
But I like taking it.
yeah, or they could sell it or, whatever. And it's just like, no, like, why did you put on it? Did someone come to the jail and do an assessment for you? Like, it's like, oh, we'll just throw them on there. And it just,
Welcome to Matt in the facilities.
people want me, it's people who don't even have a substance abuse problem.
they go in and say
They
they
get,
do.
I do, and they get on that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I won't tell you how many people that I've seen, it goes in hundreds
Mhm.
that are put in that program.
So one of the other criteria that I'm thinking about in violations is, and this is fairly new in the last couple of years, is the whole interrupt process. Where in the past, if we revoked parole, they'd be immediately checked in for, at least on furlough. And then we wait and see them again when they're back in the community. A lot of times now, they're going to have 1, 2, or up to 4 years.
Yeah.
On an interrupt before they're going to be considered. So then, does it make sense for this person to be reincarcerated for what we know is going to be that length of time, depending on the seriousness of what happened.
I think when we think about that though, with like when you mentioned stability, I have to admit, one of the first things I look at when we're doing a violation is the length of time between when they got out and when this violation happened. That is literally,
It's like great.
that is literally one of the first things that I always look for. I always look for what is the length of time in between.
Well, and there is some good research on this too, that most people are going to fail fairly quickly. And that once people get beyond about 8 months under supervision, that their likelihood of failing is 80% less than when they started.
Wow.
So it's kind of like if you can get people off to a good start, and that means that they have things going for them, right? Maybe community support, maybe a place to live, maybe a job, maybe they're getting treatment they need.
Couch to sleep on.
A couch to sleep on.
You're never gonna get me to agree to that way.
And then once you get past those initial hurdles, and now you're back in the community and you're kind of adjusting and adjusted, that the likelihood of you committing a new violation really starts to fall off pretty dramatically. I mean, something could happen. Your situation could change, or you're tempted by some situation or something. So there could be violations, or you could get set up with having to report or whatever. But the chances of people screwing up really diminish once you get past about 8 months, a year at the most. So that's another kind of thought about the stability factor. Like people that seem to have made that movement towards being more stable, being in a better position to perhaps succeed. If you do interrupt that, if somebody is kind of moving in a good direction and you send them back, you really are is restarting, but maybe restarting from a position that isn't so wonderful, because now they've got to go back through that process again of trying to create a stable environment for themselves when they do get back out. So, you want to be selective about when you do it, but sometimes it's necessary. So it does come back to like how you're evaluating that, all three of these factors. Like what is the objective risk you think is out there? What is the stability of the person? Given their kind of movement through through their supervision period, and then how serious is the violation? Some people, they may have been under for a long time, but the violation is so serious you really can't just put them back out. So that's got to be where the restart button.
I think, and another thing I was thinking about too is somebody who's been out in the community for a long time, and then they may relapse. And looking at what caused that relapse too? Was there a significant event that happened, and how are they responding to that? Because so often we see, oh, my family member passed away, or got divorced,
Some
broke up.
event.
Some event. What was the event that kind of led to the relapse,
My
or
kid got in trouble and I kind of felt.
after they've been doing so well for so long?
The other thing I'd like to mention too about the violation process and think about it, something you said, Tom, when you're talking about somebody saying, I'm ready to go to rehab now, or I'm ready to do this now, is there is some interesting research about motivational interviewing and the power of kind of getting people to say out loud that they are going to make some change in their life. So, this violation process is a real interesting opportunity to try and elicit that from people. It doesn't mean that they'll do it, doesn't mean that it's sincere, or they could be being manipulative or whatever, but there is something powerful about people who really need to do something, saying out loud to people like you, powerful people, significant people, that I'm going to do something, I'm going to change something in my life. I actually then become more likely to do it because I said it, because I admitted it, I acknowledged it, I said I was going to do something about it. So, in your process, whatever their motivations might be, and wherever that comes from in their heart, actually trying to get people to that point where they're saying, yeah, I see it now. Maybe I had to reach this point in my life where, I'm in trouble and I realized I could go back to prison, but I see now I really need to be doing this or that, or participating in this or that. Actually does seem to be meaningful in terms of whether or not people actually take that step. So maybe your whole process, and one of your goals of your violation system could be to help people get to the point where they acknowledge what they need to change, and then kind of encouraging and reinforcing what they're saying, which is another thing to take into account when you're figuring out what to do about this case. So if you do have somebody say, I'm ready, I get it, I see it now, I know I have to change,
Yeah.
I'm going to do it, and you're going, that's excellent, that's exactly what you need to be, thinking and saying, and we're going to acknowledge that that's an important step for you. And maybe you're going to go back to prison for a little while, but when you get out, I hope you remember that truth. Chances are, though, if you send them back, you kind of disrupt that process. So, but if you get up to that point anyway, it's good. So I would just mention it as you're talking and interacting with people as a part of your violation process, to think about the power that you have to influence their behavior.
Motivational interviewing is huge. It's like first thing you learn in counseling 101, but it's something that everybody could do. I'm actually a trained facilitator in it.
Well, there you go. So maybe
If anybody wants to learn any of the skills.
well, I think
Well, maybe we'll have you speak at staff meetings sometime.
And I have like because I went to train the trainers to do training for motivational interviewing for like social workers and stuff. It's really fascinating stuff.
Hey, they don't show up for the rehab. They come back for a violation. We pull the plug then.
Well, so now what's interesting is, and again, that's why violations is such an interesting topic, because really the question is that some people screw up all the time. People who are under supervision are going to screw up. Question is, how did they screw up, and in what direction are they moving? I mean, do they seem to be getting worse? Is this, you had these problems before. What are the problems now? Is this getting any better? Are you in treatment now? Do you have a place to live now? Do you have a job now? Or you had all those things before, but you have none of those things now. So you're kind of moving in a bad direction. And I think that the question about the next screw up, and this is where I think we sometimes fail from a criminal justice perspective. We tend to think of it like, I gave you one chance, now this is your second chance, so now, or this is your third chance, and now I'm done. But really, maybe what's a more interesting question is not how many times you screwed up, but in what direction are you moving? What do these failures tell us about your stability, your direction? Are you getting worse? Are you getting more violent? Or are you actually moving in a positive direction, but you have continued to screw up again, which is not uncommon? And so if it's somebody who seems to be moving in the right direction, even though this is their fifth time, that may not be somebody you want to revoke. And this is the frustration I think that parole officers have, and maybe sometimes parole boards have with parole officers, because the parole officers are looking at it like, how many chances do we give somebody? And that's one way of looking at it. But the other way of looking at it is, in what direction is this person moving? Are they becoming more of a danger to the public, or do we see that danger lessening? So this may be your fourth violation. And if we think of it in this way, like first, second, third, fourth, then we might say fourth, that's too many. We can't manage you. This is what we like to say in the supervision world. We can't manage you. What we're really saying is we're just acknowledging you're continuing to have violations. But maybe what the board should be looking at is, what kind of violations? What does it tell us about the situation? Are you unmanageable, or are you just are you incurring violation after violation, but they're not violations that are necessarily endangering the public?
So we have a guy with DUI injury result. This is very common.
Okay.
And he continues to drink.
Right.
And I think the case, I don't know how many times it came for us. I think we finally just gave up, I think, after a while.
Yeah.
I think we forgave him, get out. But he would run, continue, it was 10 times for drinking. And the PO, I see the PO was getting frustrated. I didn't blame the PO. Is that, so the guy, DUI, injury, serious injury, the victim had injuries up for the rest of their life, and he continued to drink. But he wasn't driving, but he continued to drink.
So he was.
So who was he
continuing-
harming?
Yeah, he
Well, and one of my questions with using the motivational interviewing model would be, one of my questions wouldn't necessarily be, why do you keep drinking? It would be more of, tell me what you think your issues are with drinking. Do you feel like you have, just to kind of hear where he's at and then meet him where he's at?
He didn't have an issue.
Yeah. See, and that's one of the first things I would
There you go,
want
but
to
you violate somebody who did a very bad thing, and his condition of parole, which we put him on, you will not drink and use substances because of what you did. Yet he wants that from the PO, I'm gonna drink. He kept, and you violate him every month we see him. Now, what do you do?
So here's a question, and I'm gonna spin this one, and you're
Yeah.
probably all gonna go, what? Does he need, if he's not driving and he's just drinking,
That's,
does he even need an alcohol condition? Because he's not driving anymore. He's
Right.
just drinking, so they're just bringing him back for drinking all the time. And
there,
is he harming anybody at that point?
That
Even
is-
though he had a DUI with injury?
that's the rub. I don't know, is we put that condition on and he's violating it, the PO brings it before.
Pat's not here.
Well, then you could also ask, like, you may not think you have an issue with alcohol, but where do you think that relates in
So-
terms of driving and going out
Or-
and
or
public
is he driving?
drinking and, you know?
How is it impacting your life? And what-
Yeah, how is it impact, how do you feel about
But how many?
driving
of those
and-
Understand that we're not gonna revoke parole, your issue is out.
right?
We made it clear.
Right.
For some statutory reasons.
Yeah,
So if you're not violating the law, all you're doing is drinking.
drinking at your
Not
house.
other people.
Yeah.
Because you've got it, but you can't get behind the wheel, and that part has become clear to you now.
Yeah.
So that's progress.
You're gonna get the ultimate consequence when your liver fails.
Then
I
you have
guess.
the what ifs.
Yeah.
That's what I think of the what ifs. So say the same case, I mean, the guy was,
Yeah.
but so he gets behind the wheel, either violated, the PO brought him for us 5-6 times plus. Okay, we didn't violate. Gets behind the wheel, does something, hurts somebody. Goes to court, I mean, the parole board's gonna look pretty bad.
Well, let me ask you this question. If you continue no driving, is that gonna prevent you?
No.
It's going to stay there?
No. But so you have 10 violations of parole for drinking. And we didn't do
I think
it.
with alcohol, you've also got the other statutory issue.
Yeah.
Which is kind of gonna lend him hand
As
to
long as there's-
substance use. Substance use as well.
Yeah.
And I think the legislature is gonna move the same way with substance use, but not incarcerating somebody for sole
Right.
substance use.
But this is also where having these kind of factors like objective risk, severity of violation, and stability becomes a foundation for you and a defense for you. If people say, how on earth did you not revoke this person? Say, well, he's a low risk offender, according to our objective assessments. He's employed or in a stable residence or whatever that stability indicator looks like. And, what is the violation that we have here? What is the severity of this particular violation? Well, it's that he violated the condition by drinking. So sometimes when you can put it in that context of, here's the way we look at it. We look at the severity of the violation. We look at the risk that's posed. We look at the stability of the individual. So it's not just one thing. So even though it is a situation that is not good and you don't like, and you would like to find a way to correct, if you have a guideline that you utilize or an approach to it that you utilize, at least you can explain it to people. Because it does sound bad if you just take it in isolation and say,
Right.
it's a fifth violation. What the heck are you people doing over there?
Exactly.
Then it puts you in a very defensive position of, trying to explain these very things that I think that I'm talking about. And say, well, we looked at things, beyond just the instance of violation.
And this is kind of what we've been asked for from DOC and from prisoners' rights around what is the board looking at? So we know kind of when they're doing their assessments of the case, maybe, because they're saying we're gonna bring anything and everything before you and possibly waste lots of time because they don't know exactly what you're looking at.
But if they know what you're likely to revoke, then they'll be more willing to invest their time in bringing cases forward if they think they seem like cases that might be revoked.
And the other thing is, so they can play the parole board.
Yes.
It does sound.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of butt covering that happens in this
Yeah.
business, right? And people are, I want to make sure I'm not blamed and
There you go.
whatever happens, and they don't point the finger at me. And obviously you have authority and you have decision-making responsibilities. And that means sometimes the buck stops right with you. But again, that's why you need a guideline. That's why you need a way of explaining decisions.
And
so
you
that you're
can
not-
easily defend your decision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you say, if you had a case where you had these kinds of circumstances, this is how we look at that case.
And I
Now,
think-
we may not like the way the case turned out, but we can tell you what we were thinking.
And I think now that if we do something like this too, then it'll help write the findings too in these cases and direct more of okay, we looked at these are the factors we looked at, and these are our findings. Because oftentimes when we're writing findings, it's okay, how do I wordsmith this way and stuff?
So I would suggest that when you're thinking about creating factors for maybe each of these three areas, objective risk is objective risk. I don't think you need to
Right.
create any other
No.
factors. The violation, I think you should have a way of scaling the severity of the violation, so you be able to demonstrate how you viewed that violation. You could have an aggravating or mitigating circumstance in that area. And that aggravating circumstance might be, it's the third time they did this thing.
Okay,
Or
Which is all built into our matrix.
yeah.
yeah, and that's,
Already there.
and that's the question with the matrix is, do we want to build in the number of violations or not, and that kind of thing? And is this number of violations past violations, or is it current with it, that kind of thing?
How far back do you want to go? How complicated do you want to make this?
Exactly.
So do you want to make it violations on the current offense? Do you want to make it violations on the current parole?
Right, exactly.
Do you want to make it current violations within the last year, regardless of what their status may have been or which offense they were serving at that time?
So one thing to think of is when we grant parole, we look at the history.
Right.
So now that they're on parole, should we be focused on what they're doing now?
Yes, because you've already taken into account what they did to get to that point. Now you're at this point. So what you're really looking at is what happened between the time of the parole and the time of this violation.
That's why I always look first in the date between when the violation was and when
There
we let
you
him
go.
out.
So it's like, all right, so in those 3 months since you got out, what happened? What's going on?
I always look at those dates
We
first.
have these,
It
these
didn't
things.
require me to have an approved residence, so I lived on.
The normal, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of why, that was always this part of the matrix that always confused me, because I'm like, is this the number of violations that are coming before you right now? Or is this the history? Because you could have a combo slew of,
Well, if you use the current parole,
yeah, okay, so it's the current parole, not the current,
Right, yeah.
okay,
so they may have been out on parole previously, but what you're looking at is on this release, how many previous violations have been dealt with? And
so
what is
maybe
the
that's
severity?
another section is like previous violations, and then the
Previous
severity of the current violation.
Yes. So you can say, which is another way of measuring the direction in which the person is moving.
Like, what have they graduated to?
Or what if they reduce
Or what have they
to?
reduced to?
And, you know,
Always worst case.
Yeah, there are definitely people.
But
that
it's
say, "Look, all I did is- all I did is
Time
see a lot. It's better than
it's-
being
They're
beat up."
escalating, not de-escalating.
But we get to read the affidavit, so we know it.
Yeah. Without it needing it.
Yeah.
And then where most of your aggravating and mitigating would then come in the stability category. So in the stability category, it seems that is where if you're going to create some specific things to mention, like
Mhm.
period of time under supervision, period of time since last violation, length of current employment, length of time in treatment.
I also look at what the PO has done to, when there's issues, what else he has done to try to solve sanctions or other means of incarcerations. So when you see a PO has put a lot of effort into it and the individual is still violating, still has the same behaviors, I said, okay, well, PO's done their part.
You're satisfied that
Exactly.
it's kind of exhausted their.
So sanctions, so,
They have tried to solve the problem by, other means.
They're making curfew. They're making the case that they're unmanageable.
Exactly, that's, so.
But you'll have to decide, you'll have to sort out.
And some POs are pretty good. I mean, you see that how they
Oh, yeah.
bend over backwards, so they do the extra, but other ones just don't seem to do much, but.
And I think when I watch POs or work with POs, to me, there are POs who are really trying to help people be successful. And you see it. And when there are violations or they're responding to violations or they're dealing with the case, what you see, what comes out of it is you see they're actually trying to help this person, move forward, be successful, get somewhere. And then there are other parole officers who that doesn't seem to be their goal. Their goal seems to be really just to kind of document the failure without necessarily this underlying interest in trying to generate success. And I think that's an interesting thing to see too in the violations process, because you'll see somebody who's, I've done everything I can do, but really all you've done is identify all these failures. How has it helped? The things that you did, or you made a referral and you ordered them to do this or stay away from that, but how did you help the person actually get where you want them to be with their kind of life? And if you don't see that happening, then that, to me, that doesn't carry as much weight to me when I look at that, what that PO has done, because I don't know that they're really trying to help the person succeed. But I agree with you when I see that they're trying to help the person succeed and it just isn't happening. Then you say, okay, they've really done what they can do. And the PO who's just kind of sanctioning people left and right for every failure, that's the person where I would look at him and say, well, here's something else I think you should be doing, Mr. Urban's PO.
There's a few POs that are great like that. Like Tom's one. He'll say, he goes, I've tried everything. He'll throw up his hand and say, I had a loss, And I said, no, and I want respect for him for saying.
Yeah, because he feels like that person's success is what he's shooting for. And if he can't help them get there, I feel like I've lost too. And that's meaningful.
But they're also the ones that don't want to recommend revocation until they absolutely have to.
Yeah. Yes. And that may be, they may have a threshold that's different than yours, but you can get a sense of that from that in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. So I think those are all interesting things for you to sort out. So look at all this interesting stuff you got in your violation package here. You've got trying to create maybe a objective way of looking at the cases so you might be more consistent. You've got this opportunity to motivate people to move in a positive direction. You have to consider what the real public safety risks are at the moment, considering what this person has been doing since the time of their release. I just think it's a fascinating part of what you're responsible for doing. I just, want to help you get a way of doing it that you feel puts you in the best possible position to make.
It sounds like updating our own matrix.
Yeah, and that's where that's where I was going to. I wanted to make more columns to it. And I think probably by the next meeting, I could go through and do I've been drawing it out a little bit.
Mhm.
And then we can expand on our stability factors or not and that kind of thing and go from there.
Well,
And then I was thinking, I could take a stab at like the severity and like a severity ranking. And then we can tweak that too.
like I said last time, you can make it more complicated. And some jurisdictions have made it very complicated. I think it's better if it's relatively simple, and if it helps you focus on the things that are most important.
If you make it too complicated, it won't get used.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'd say add things if you need to, but simplify wherever you can. Make it simple to apply and use, and be clear about the things that matter the most.
So for Katie and Sam, for example, where we would make the matrix assessment, well, there wasn't a situation where you could not have the option of revoking. There were some less restrictive things, which are very helpful.
Okay.
So, for example, it was a minor issue, and the three options might be continue with a reprimand, sanction, or add a condition. We wouldn't have the option to. So it sort of takes that mindset of thinking about revocation out of that decision.
You don't have to struggle with it.
Yeah.
You're left with the options that maybe as a board you feel are generally the better option. Okay. Good. Yeah.
This is helpful.
The other thing I was just going to mention, which isn't so much related to violations, but just to your conversation earlier about people recommending intensive outpatient and whatever. It never ceases to amaze me that in this world, in this parole world, how people always feel the need to add something. If people from corrections feel the need to add a condition, a thing, a something, board members often feel the need to add something, like as if parole isn't enough, that I need to add more. I need to put more on the person to either make me feel comfortable as a board member or as a corrections person or somebody else, a PO. I want more. And the truth is less is really what helps people be successful. So it's like trying to fight against that tide of folks feeling that we always need to impose more in order to be safer. The truth is that it really doesn't seem to work that way. And if you're going to impose something, be sure that you've got a real legitimate reason, objective reason to move in that direction. Otherwise, you're just creating additional barriers and obstacles. And that makes other people maybe feel safe because I impose some additional rules, but it doesn't necessarily help public safety. And it certainly doesn't help the person succeed unless you've got a real good reason for doing it. So,
Well, and it doesn't allow the professionals to decide where they're really at. But I think even more than that, like what you said with the motivation interviewing, it's not so much about what the PO thinks, what the board member, like one of the first things is what does the offender feel like they need? Where, like, what voice in that? Like, how much are we asking that? What is it that you need to be
what
successful?
is their next step?
Because that's where their motivation is going to be.
Exactly. So,
If
and
they feel like you're helping them with something that they need,
Yeah.
their motivation level is going to go through the roof.
yes,
And then you can build in this other things that you want them to do. But
you can try and create the structure, but you're right.
Yeah.
Whether it's a parole release hearing or whether it's a violation hearing, when you're asking the person, what is your next step? What do you see as your next step? Where do you see this moving in the next month? Or what do you see happening in the next 60 days that will be consistent with what you want to accomplish? It really is such a powerful kind of tool that sometimes we just don't employ as much as we could.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. I mean, all of us who've been around forever have done motivation interviewing and not ad nauseum. And however, I think we made that comment about adding more. We should talk to the building over there because what I've seen, and I haven't seen lot of change. And I see changes here and there. But I see when there's a problem with a client or a probationer, adding more is what they see as the solution. And I see it myself sometimes. What are we gonna do with this guy? Oh, he's continually screwing up. He's doing the same thing. Obviously, he needs something else.
Well,
Yeah. I just need to give him another.
If we give him this, then he'll be better.
well, and you kind of hit on something too that made me think too, because a lot of times it comes up of the use of an incarcerative sanction. How much, and I keep thinking to myself, and all the training I've heard is how much are we disrupting by putting them back in the facility? But I often hear sometimes that they need to go back in the facility because they're not doing anything else. So we got to put them back or give them something to show that they're doing something wrong. So,
Work through.
and that's the question too, is I have is that doing more harm than it's good or not? And because I hear it come up in some of these dispositions of, I think they need to be back in the facility, if not long-term, short-term. And so,
How the weight have come.
Yeah.
and does it really, is it more disruptive?
So in part, so with this discussion about what's their next step, it's also like, what's our next step?
Uh-huh.
You know, as a system, and people working in the system, you're interested in long-term public safety. So it is about responding to this immediate issue or this current situation. It's also about long-term, what do you see happening? Where do you see this going? How are you going to use the resources that you have and whatever, community services and opportunities exist? How do you see them being used and deployed in a way to help this person move in the right direction? And getting them to think about it, do it, it's good. And for us to think about it and do it like, oh, these are people from a public safety perspective. It is not appropriate to put them in the community right now. They are too dangerous, and that's fine. But that's a small part of the population. There's a much bigger part of the population that have already been punished for the crime they committed for some period of time, are now in the community. And our interest now, I think, is how do we keep them there? How do we help them move forward? How do we make them more stable? And what do we do to interrupt the failures that are we can anticipate pretty easily? A lot of those failures sometimes happen because of roadblocks that we might create. So you plug that in to like as we're thinking about next steps, it's like, what are our next steps? So if we use incarceration now, well, okay, then the person's going to get back out and then we're going to see them again. What do we do next time? How are we going to use our options next time? So it isn't just a one-time thing. Okay, so I think you got a plan. I think you're on the right track. I think using your guideline and modifying it and making it work for you is probably better than trying to take Minnesota's or any of the other jurisdictions I showed you, which have their own complicated stories and histories for why they wound up with what they wound up with. But in the end, I think that if you have a guideline, here's the question that you'll want to ask yourself. So let's say you figure it out, you got your pieces, you got your components, you got the maybe aggravating and mitigating considerations. Is then, do you use it? And how do you use it? And
Yes.
if you don't use your own guideline at least 2/3 of the time, then there's something wrong with your guideline. So I would say, once you put it in place, measure it. See whether or not, if your guideline is suggesting that people who fit a certain pattern, moderate risk, medium level severity, relatively good stability, are you keeping those people in the community? Or let me even ask you, what is the outcome you'd like to see for people with different combinations? Because if you can articulate that, then you could really measure your consistency.
When we first developed this matrix, at staff meetings, we would review those where the decision was made outside of the given parameters. So if, for example, the board elected to revoke parole and that was not an option, we would go back and review the case and say, well, why did we do this? And what was the reason for it? So a way to measure.
Yes, and maybe there was a good reason.
But and at that time, it came when the parole board was much different in how it was working. The vast majority of cases were revoked.
Yeah.
This feeling was they violated a condition or some conditions. And the next step was for them to go back in the system, be reevaluated for furlough, and then we'd see them when they did well again.
Yeah.
So they were nearly all revoked.
I call it our 20th century version of
Yes.
decision making, in which we basically gave people chances and we watched them. You know, the word probation.
We made 25 conditions.
Yeah, and we give them 25. The word probation comes from the Latin word probatio, which means to give someone an opportunity. And I think that's how we kind of looked at it. We looked at, we'll give you a chance, but then, you know, it's up to you. If you screw up, you know, we're gonna send you back. And that was the game. And that's the way we played the game. And I think it's only really in the last 20 years or so where we started to think, that's not really a game we're winning as a system, as a society. You know, that's not really taking us anywhere, because sure enough, people will screw up and sure enough, we'll keep sending them back. But what are we really trying to do here? And I think we're really trying to help people change behavior. So as a behavior management tool, that's not a particularly effective approach. So then I think in the 21st century, we've tried to move away from that. We gave you a chance and you failed, into more about, what are we trying to do with you? What is keeping you from being successful? What can we do to help promote more success? And in our decision making and our violation decision making, are we helping you move in the right direction? So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah, that's okay.
digressing. So I think you got a plan.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that we'll work on too is how much do we pre-populate with risk and all of that, and then how much do how do we use it? Because I don't want it to become like the matrix was, of the chair just fills it out as part of the paper trail,
Right.
and that it's actually being used in deliberations.
Too onerous, so it doesn't get used.
Right. And then it's part of the deliberations.
Well, one thought would be to have the board members fill it out as they do the case, and then see whether or not they fill it
That's
out
what
the
we used
same
to
way.
do. Yeah.
Kind of like the SDMF.
And we used to do that with our matrix way back when everybody would have a copy.
I think that's a great idea.
During the interview.
Yeah, and that way you can see, because if you're not agreeing on what is high risk, or you're not agreeing on what is kind of stable, or if you're not agreeing on what is the severity of the violation, then, you know, that's something for y'all to talk about in terms of how you're approaching it.
I watched you shake your head, Wayne.
I just never have been, nor will be, into forms, documents that pigeonhole people into a corner. And let me ask you this, Richard.
Okay.
You're an attorney.
Yes, I am.
Is that going to become a discoverable item that we've done at home? And prisoner's rights says, I want to see those forms.
Sure.
Once again, we just, here, have another bullet for the gun.
Well,
There you go.
here's the thing though, Wayne. It's
No, I get it, and I'm willing to accept. I'm just, you know, she asked, and I told her my thoughts.
Well, I've been watching
Let me put it this way. I hear what you're saying, but if you don't have a way of explaining your decisions, then you're just
It's a converse of my argument.
people take pot shots at you every time. because there's no way to explain the system that you employ to reach an outcome. So if it's because I thought so, then you're going to take a beating. And what happens is your best defense
What you have to.
is what you can demonstrate was the foundation for your decision. People can disagree with you about what the decision is, but if you say, here's the way I go about it, here's my foundation, here's my approach, take issue with that if you want. If you don't think I should consider risk, okay, I should consider. You don't think I should consider the severity of the violation? No, I should. What about their stability in the community? Should I consider that? Yeah. So what you're saying is, this is what I should consider. That's what I consider. That's why you would win every single case. But, you know, it's a different way of looking at what you're talking about. It does create another, document, and might be something that people would take issue with, but it's taking issue with how you're approaching the work. And that's something that you should win because you'll have a way of explaining how you approach the work. No, I'm sorry, I didn't make it.
No, I hear you, I respect your argument, I agree with you, but we still get back to the human factor.
Absolutely.
Because right now we're doing the SDMF, and every time we have one of these meetings, we go over to, well, you said it's mitigating, and I said it's aggravating. We gotta have consistency. Why? Because we have a tool that we have these measurements, and if I interpret something that's aggravating, and I truly feel it's aggravating, and my colleagues think it's mitigating, am I to agree?
Well, I think what it helps, and I
Because it didn't fit this and this.
I'll be glad to talk about the SDMF stuff, but the SDMF tool doesn't tell you what to do. It just suggests the areas you should look at, and it has a way of categorizing whether or not it's aggravating or mitigating for that area. But it doesn't produce an outcome that says, therefore you should parole. I think so where the consistency thing comes from is if two of you think that you looked at the same facts in the same case, same situation, you said, I see that as aggravated. And another person looked at the same case, same facts, and said, I see it as mitigating. Then it means there's either a problem with the definition or with the interpretation of the information.
Exactly.
And I think the reason to talk then is just to figure out whether or not you're like applying the information the same way. It's not trying to take out the human factor.
Exactly.
You can't. We're in the human business.
I think if anything, for me, it helps rein in some of my outside thinking of the counseling world, and it helps me kind of stay focused on okay, no, wait, I actually have to make this a little bit more black and white. For me, it helps rein it in a little more.
It's like, look, here are the factors. So let's look at the factors, see if we can agree on how we read those factors in this.
And when we review them too, can't think of a single case yet, but we didn't all agree that, yeah, this should have been here.
Or it was a wrong checkbox or.
Yeah, it's not that people were deliberately looking at it differently.
Yeah. No, so when I was the attorney for the South Carolina Parole Board, I hated the case where I had to go in and argue why they made the decision because there was no guideline. There was no rationale that I could provide other than fall back upon that it is within the sole discretion of the parole board to make the decision, which makes you look like an idiot because people say, well,
our attorneys have said the same thing.
Yeah. So I helped them develop a guideline in part so I could go into court and not look like an idiot. And so I could say, no, this is the way they approach their cases. And these are the factors they consider. And every case is different, every situation different. But generally, this is the way they approach their business. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's great. And so I'm just saying, while sometimes it sounds like maybe you're being pigeonholed, really what you're doing, I think, is being held. All right, I beat that enough. Sorry. So we good on that? We good? You got enough?
I think so.
Structure, direction, information. All right, we only got one more thing to talk about, and then you'll be rid of me. So the last thing we started to talk about a little bit, and I know it's like, do you want to take a break before we do this? I don't think it'll take a long time.
No, because I have to leave in 45 minutes.
So it's about your statistics and the performance measures and what you kind of choose to maintain.
And this is what I included was just an example for February because it's been a while since we've actually printed one of these because there's just so much going on. Keep saying that over and over again. We keep the data. We still have the data. We just haven't done a formal part.
So here's my suggestion to you. Since it's late in the day, normally I would just ask you and I would write things on the board, but I'll just go ahead and make my suggestion. Tell me what you think. So what I think you should get down to is a kind of a critical indicators list of about 6 items. And that critical indicators list should be the 6 items that you think are the most important things for you as a board and as a board member to know about. That would help you see the direction of things or the status of things. Now you've got about 30 or 40 different measures here. And I think, I don't know about you, but when I look at something and it's got 30 or 40 measures, I'll look at the first couple and then I kind of glaze over. You know, like, okay, we got more numbers over here, we got more numbers over here. So what I would suggest you do is maybe just take a minute and walk through like what, and I'm not saying you shouldn't collect it.
Yep.
But in terms of like producing a report and for the benefit of the board or for others who are interested in kind of board's activities, I would try and get this down to just a handful of measures that you think are the most important ones, and then produce it every month and talk about it. Actually look at them and consider them. You know, are we seeing more cases or fewer cases? Are we paroling more people or fewer people? Are we having more revocations or fewer?
And while we're doing this, I was actually looking at, because it's that time of year, I've got to provide data to the folks, the budget folks, to include in the budget presentation.
So, and for them too, I mean, while you can, you know, give them all kinds of data and
Oh, we don't give up a lot.
but it's like, what are the things that you think are most telling or significant, or tell the story that you think you want to tell? And how can the data from a few of these items help you tell that story? So you want to walk through this just for a second, and you tell me, or you tell Mary Jane, which of these you think are the most important. Now, some of these I noticed there's like almost nothing for this month on some of these. So like those look like easy ones to like cut.
The top one where it talks about granted versus denied.
So granted versus denied. Let me see. Yeah.
You've got your risk assessments on the left.
Yeah, I mean looks like a great one, right? You like that one?
I like the whole first sheet.
Yeah.
Because I think the first sheet, I think, even though it's complicated, it's talking about paroles in general, about the grant. It's this one. It talks about the grant and denied. And then it also talks about presumptive parole that's kind of fizzled out and been a flop because it's too stringent. The criteria is too stringent. We don't have that population anymore.
No.
So that's something to take. Well, the only thing we're going to care about that I need it for the legislature. Right.
But for your monthly.
And even the minimum eligibility hearings versus the subsequent, that's more for me because I'm more curious of how many mins we have versus how many that are coming back. So I think the top one I think is helpful to even. And the thing that I always, with this one, when I first came on with you all, the big thing was to look at the low risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that Pete, that's the one thing I'll remember from Pete is that you got to grant 90% of the low risk offenders. And it's like, you never hit it. So, and so that's always the thing of when you're looking at the grant rate is, what does it mean?
Right.
And that's where I'm kind of at is when you're looking at that, what does it mean to you kind of thing? And I don't think that I don't know if that's necessarily. I think the bigger thing to me would be looking at month to month, because there are some months where I can watch it go, oh, we had a high grant, now it's a low grant. And is it is it risk? Is it type of cases, that kind of thing?
So maybe what would be helpful then for like a chart that is important is to also have the last 2 months or the last quarter or something to compare it to. So if you say, these are all important numbers to know, what direction is that moving? Is that going up or down? So it gives you a reference.
Mm-hmm.
So granted versus denied, using risk assessment score. Yeah, you may never hit 90% or.
Yeah, I mean, do we need to have a level that we're shooting for?
Well, and that came about from a historical thing because we were nowhere near that.
Yeah.
When we first started using risk tools, well, what should be our target number?
Got it.
And that was something that we came up with
Got
as a group. And so it became ingrained in Peter's mind,
His thing was numbers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
which
this
was good.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that matters when you do this is, are you, as a percentage, are you paroling more low-risk people than moderate risk? And as a percentage, more moderate risk people than high risk? You should, I work with jurisdictions where they're paroling more high-risk people than low-risk people, and I'll say, why? And they say, well, because we didn't like their crimes. And I'm like, okay, all right, well, that's kind of flying in the face of what having an objective risk assessment is trying to tell you. It's trying to tell you that the risk is not the same as their crime. So if you're paroling as a percent, so if you had 10 low risk people and you paroled 6 of them, and you had 10 high risk people and you paroled 2 of them, that would be consistent with the risk assessment approach. And that's what you'd want to be able to see from your data. So I don't know that it's about meeting 90%, but it's that as we look at the people we see, that generally of those people within a group, that we're paroling people who are low risk at a higher rate than people who are at a higher
It was a way for us at the time, which I think it might have followed when you were trained.
Yeah, I kind
Where
of
we talked about if they're low risk, move them along.
why are you keeping them? Yeah, no, I agree.
How you get to that is you have a target number. So if it's
I agree.
90%,
I think the other problem sometimes is the low risk. Some of the low risks are actually becoming more high. They just haven't got there yet because they're your revolving.
Yeah,
They're your revolving doors.
absolutely.
They won't do it again.
And that's why you don't want to say 90%, because there are people
Yeah.
you're not going to parole
Right.
because of their offense.
Exactly.
But they are low risk. So you got sex offenders and you've got murderers and
Yep.
that low risk group because,
we always excluded that.
okay, well, you can do it that way.
I mean, it's just a crime of passion, so
Yeah.
it's better to release the murderer than a guy that does 1,000 B&Es. So the guy that murdered, the guy's not gonna do it again.
From a risk assessment, so which is why I like to talk with
But
brokers.
1,000 meetings wouldn't be low risk.
That's true.
Well, is risk versus stakes. Yeah, you got some high stakes cases,
Yes.
and that's, you look at it. But anyways, all right, so you like this, maybe you'd have a
So-
chart that shows something about.
Yeah, and I think how we look at I think how we look at this will be important too, because right now we've got the current month, the year to date, the fiscal year. To me, that's too much.
Yeah.
And how we can look at,
Year to date.
yeah, I'm thinking maybe even turning it into more of a chart where we can look at
I was saying.
it, some kind of graph where we can look at it monthly. It might be
That'd
able,
be easier for me to digest if I was looking at it.
and then we can post it to the public if we put it right on our website.
All right, and we cut out the ones in the middle, but out of state parole, we cut that out.
Yeah,
I mean, I know you're gonna capture it, but as far as a monthly report for you, how about subsequent parole hearings? What is the point you're trying to make with this, Greg? Is that people who get,
for me, so this, I don't think we need anything below. I don't think we need to, this was more for me because I think it's helpful to know how many are getting paroled at their initial hearing, their minimum hearing versus subsequently.
okay,
But I don't think,
you might want to maintain it, but I don't know that
yeah, I don't think we need to,
in your top 6 or whatever.
yeah.
You ever paroled any from state? I don't remember anybody being paroled from state.
No, out of state means an ICOTS or a parole
The
detainer.
guys in the,
No,
never mind, sorry.
Yep.
Okay, your violations looks like an important.
yes.
Important one to understand, how, it tells you how many you continued, how many revoked, how many waived.
I think by type is important too.
Then you got a couple of boxes with nothing in them, maybe they can go.
The SCS stuff, because that's, do we need to, we don't have enough SCS. And we don't do enough rescissions either. Most of them are parole to detainers.
Well, now that you have parole agreements by the end of the hearing,
Yeah.
rescission time is none.
And this is a parole to detainer.
So, you could probably, so a bunch of these where there really isn't a story that you're telling, with it to yourselves or whatever you can just cut out?
I think,
Maybe victim testimony. I don't know if that's something you want to, I know you want to capture it. What story does it tell you?
How many victims are participating? Is our process inclusive for that?
Okay. So maybe you want to keep that, maybe not. I don't know.
I would think early release, maybe something.
Early release and rubber band.
And reprimands?
So that's the process we developed
Ah,
for POs to bring instead of a violation.
oh, right. So you can see if it's hopefully going up, you know, that that's being utilized. All right. Yeah. Go on to page 3.
And I think you're just gonna start repeating.
These are just the year to date.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So if you had maybe those 5 or 6 boxes that we talked about, and you showed them both current month and year to date, or some reference that gave you a sense of time and progress. Is that all you need?
I think so.
And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't collect all of this.
No,
data,
it's
it's just how you
a good
report it.
one-page thing for us to kind of, they could keep the other information. So,
Yeah, so if you have a 1-page report every month, then I would hope that you'd look at it and talk about it. So what does it tell you about business? You know, is business good?
yeah,
Do things going one way or another? And then you have a document that actually is meaningful to you.
Dean, is it meaningful to track the probable cause hearings and the bail hearings, or?
only the numbers.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering. I'm just looking at this as a whole. I'm thinking as we institute, just on my own behalf, I'm thinking it may be good just from a utilization standpoint, when we change the condition modifications, to maybe
Yeah.
start tracking how many are coming in through the new process, but I don't think we need to put it on a 1-pager.
No, as long as we've got the information, because
Yeah.
I think it's important when we document the workload change
Right.
as we get more into this, especially since presumptive parole isn't
Yes.
violation where we're seeing the
Right.
fatal probable cause hearings are just not for us. It's
Or if we get asked. Yeah.
Okay, you got your performance metrics. Great.
Wayne?
You asked her, is this document done for a funding grant or something, or why do we have that?
Where?
when you're looking at them.
Applies to women only.
Okay, so that is so the risk scores, there are low, moderate on the ORAS, which I think is going to be changing to the WARNA pretty soon. Low, moderate is not a scoring option for males. It's only a scoring option for the female ORAS.
Is that the Boras thing?
Yes, it's an ORAS thing.
Okay.
They have different scoring levels, the male and the female tool. But the female tool is gonna be changing. I don't know when, but they're moving to the Warner, I think it's called.
So-
There you go.
So
Yeah.
y'all don't really have equal rights, do you?
Can't even get the same risk assessment.
Yeah. I don't understand why they're considered less risky.
When I do biopsychosocials and substance use assessments, they're the same, no matter what gender is.
If you don't know me right now. It's perfectly clear. I have 3 daughters, no sons, so I'm kind of in the women's world and trying to stay current in this whole thing.
I'm the exact opposite. My house is all testosterone except for me. 2 kids. Yeah.
I have 2 boys and a girl, and I'd rather deal with the boys over the girl any day.
Never had that opportunity. But I really agree based on my.
Well, it's been great spending time with you today. What else would you like to talk about, or what else can I help you with?
When are you coming back?
Well, I was kind of thinking this would be it. But I would be very interested in what your final products look like and how this kind of comes together for you. Of course, I'll be available to you offsite or virtually or what have you, if there are things I can help you with. And if you want me to come back, need me to come back, we have a process that you can do that. We call it ad hoc technical assistance. You can send it to the Community Supervision Resource Center. Here, I will give you one of our little cards. Oh, shoot, that didn't bring it. I'll send
I
you
know
one
how to
of those.
find you.
Yeah, you know, how much do parole board members make this off for one?
They're part-time people. They don't actually get a salary. They get a per diem that is not terribly generous.
No, what is it?
For every day that they work, but because they have so many cases, they work every day.
Oh,
So they
really?
get per diems every day, but there isn't a set salary. I wish they were a full-time board. They need to be.
Probably just for J. Reuben Long and himself, right?
Pardon?
Probably just for the J. Reuben Long Center for itself.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That one was always popping.
always. Indeed. But I think, based on the request you sent in, these were the areas
Oh,
that you
just
kind
send it
of.
down there.
Oh, no, okay.
It's good to have some.
Well, I love working with you, love
Yeah.
talking with you, and you do great work here, and you've always continued to move in a very positive direction, and it's always a pleasure to interact with you, so. Be glad to help if I can, so if you do want some further technical assistance, just feel free to ask for it.
Thank you.
I'll find a way to make that work out.
Thank you.
I do have some evaluation forms, you know.
Apparently he doesn't ski.
Doesn't sound terrible.
There's a lot of people that.
It is flatter than flat in South Carolina.
He doesn't ski or
Right,
there would
right.
be a reason to come back.
You know, Wayne, we ski in the water, and I just realized how
Yes.
hazardous it is to be in the water here.
Sorry.
It's really simple in the winter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot harder.
Is it?
Water hurts. Oh,
So with this, as we're doing evaluations, if this is it, I'm gonna adjourn our formal meeting if nobody objects.
You need a motion?
I'm debating.
Take a motion for Germany. There you go.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. It's like they won't give me one unless I ask for one.